Hey there, welcome to Broderos. Tonight, we've got hours of chilling horror stories combined with soothing rain sounds to help you relax and sleep. Before you drift off, leave a comment below and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is. And don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe right away. If you end up not enjoying it, you can always take it back later. Get cozy and let the fear take over. Abandoned cars in Dakota. The plains stretched endlessly in every direction, their vast emptiness both beautiful and unsettling under the moonlit sky. I'd driven these roads before, but tonight was different, quieter, heavier. The stars, usually bright and reassuring, seemed muted, as though some unseen force pressed against the atmosphere. I glanced at the clock on the dashboard. 11:30. It felt later, the kind of late where your mind plays tricks and shadows take on shapes they shouldn't. The hum of the engine was steady, almost hypnotic, as the dark ribbon of the road unfurled ahead. The only company I had was the faint static on the radio, a station too weak to hold a signal out here. The night was eerily still, not even a whisper of wind through the open plains. It was the kind of stillness that made you feel like you were being watched, even when you were certain you were alone. My hands tightened on the steering wheel, and I tried to shake off the irrational unease. "Nothing but my imagination," I muttered, but the words didn't comfort me. My voice sounded too loud in the silence of the car, almost intrusive. Up ahead, the road curved slightly, leading into a stretch where the horizon dipped low, as if the earth had been smoothed out by some ancient hand. That's when I noticed it, a faint glow, barely perceptible at first, flickering in the distance. I squinted, leaning forward over the wheel. It wasn't headlights, there were no other cars. It wasn't a town, there wasn't one for miles. It wasn't even the moonlight, which hung cold and pale to the east. This light was warm, unnatural, and distinctly out of place. The static on the radio shifted suddenly, a sharp crackle that made me jump. It wasn't just noise anymore, there was something underneath it. A voice, maybe, or the ghost of a melody. Whatever it was, it felt wrong, like it didn't belong in this world. I reached out to turn the dial, trying to tune it in or silence it completely, but my fingers froze halfway. I couldn't explain why, but I had the distinct feeling that whatever I was hearing wasn't meant for me. The glow grew brighter as I drove, no longer a distant flicker, but a steady beacon cutting through the darkness. I could feel it pulling my gaze, distracting me from the road. It wasn't natural, that much was certain. Probably just a cell tower, I said aloud, but my voice lacked conviction. It had to be something mundane. Planes, satellites, even a reflection off a nearby hill. Anything other than the bizarre alternatives my mind was beginning to conjure. The light didn't flicker or pulse like the flashing of a tower. It stayed constant, yet it seemed to shift, almost breathing as it hovered over the stretch of road ahead. It wasn't blinding or harsh, but carried an intensity that made it impossible to ignore. I slowed the car instinctively, leaning forward over the steering wheel. There was no sound, no hum or buzz from the direction of the light. The stillness around me felt more oppressive now, the quiet of the plains transformed into something unnatural. The closer I got, the stranger it seemed. There was no structure beneath it, no poles, wires, or anything to anchor the light to the ground. It just hung there, suspended in the void like a star that had wandered too close to Earth. My thoughts spiraled into explanations, each less satisfying than the last. It could be some new kind of drone or experimental tech from the nearby airbase. Maybe even a weather balloon, though I'd never seen one that glowed like this. I laughed nervously, a dry sound that didn't reach my chest. Maybe it's just some farmer's fancy spotlight, I mumbled, testing out a new gadget. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. Something about the light felt deliberate, like it was aware of me, watching, waiting. My stomach churned with a queasy unease I couldn't shake. I tightened my grip on the wheel and pressed my foot on the accelerator, hoping to drive past it, leave it behind. But as I got closer, the light seemed to move too, hovering directly above the road as though it were blocking my path. The static on the radio grew louder as I approached the light, a grating noise that sent shivers down my spine. I reached out to turn the dial, but the crackling seemed to grow in intensity the closer my fingers came to the knob. "Come on," I muttered, twisting it anyway. The static briefly faded, replaced by a low hum, followed by something else, something faint. It wasn't music, nor was it any station I recognized. It sounded almost like voices, distant and unintelligible, speaking in tones that wavered between urgent whispers and low murmurs. I froze, hands still resting on the radio, as I strained to make out the sounds. It wasn't English, or at least, not words I could understand. The rhythm felt wrong, too fast and too slow all at once, as though multiple voices overlapped but never aligned. The glow ahead of me pulsed faintly, and for a moment, the voices seemed to sync with its rhythm. My chest tightened. "No way," I whispered, shaking my head. It had to be interference, some mix of frequencies colliding out here in the middle of nowhere. This wasn't something else. The voices grew sharper, more defined. A syllable here, a guttural noise there. It felt like they were trying to form words, trying to reach me. I slapped the radio off, the sudden silence almost deafening in contrast. My heart pounded as I gripped the wheel tighter, sweat slicking my palms. But the relief was short-lived. The static came back, unbidden, this time louder than before. The voices pushed through again, clearer now but still unintelligible. My pulse quickened as I noticed something else, a faint, rhythmic tapping that seemed to come from the car itself. No, not the car. It was outside. The glow ahead flickered, and for a fleeting moment, I thought I saw a shadow dart across the road. The glow grew sharper, its edges no longer soft or diffuse. It burned brighter now, casting faint, shifting patterns across the empty road ahead. I slowed the car instinctively, my breath catching as the light's intensity became impossible to ignore. It wasn't just a glow anymore, it was alive. The air around it shimmered, warping and bending like heat rising from asphalt on a summer day. But this wasn't heat. The night air remained cool, almost unnaturally so, as if the light was drawing warmth from everything around it. I blinked hard, thinking my eyes were playing tricks on me. The patterns moved like liquid, twisting and rippling in impossible ways. Lines and shapes I couldn't fully comprehend flickered within the glow, forming and dissolving faster than my mind could register. It was mesmerizing and deeply unsettling. "What the hell?" I whispered, leaning forward over the wheel. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter, knuckles white against the smooth leather. The car's headlights caught something in the glow, a faint, mist-like substance that swirled within it, as though the air itself was being pulled toward the light. It reminded me of oil on water, shifting colors and shapes that defied logic. As I crept closer, the static on the radio seemed to sync with the movement of the light, rising and falling in rhythm with the ripples. The faint voices returned, clearer now, though still unintelligible. They didn't sound human. My pulse hammered in my ears as the patterns began to stretch outward, spilling across the road like ghostly tendrils. They moved with purpose, curling and writhing, almost as if they were searching for something or someone. "Just keep driving," I told myself, forcing my foot down on the gas pedal. But even as the car surged forward, a sickening thought crept into my mind. The light wasn't just hovering. It was waiting. The car slowed against my will. My foot pressed harder on the gas pedal, but the engine sputtered and groaned, resisting me. A cold knot formed in my stomach as the dashboard lights flickered, casting strange shadows across the interior. No, 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 I muttered, glancing at the glowing light that now loomed directly overhead. It was impossibly close, bathing the entire stretch of road in an ethereal radiance. The rippling patterns danced faster, more erratic, as if reacting to my presence. With a final shudder, the engine died completely. The headlights dimmed and then blinked out, leaving me stranded in the unnatural glow. The silence that followed was absolute. No hum of the engine, no rustle of wind, not even the faint chirp of nocturnal insects. Just a void. I gripped the wood tightly, my breathing shallow and rapid. The car felt like a fragile cocoon, offering little protection from whatever was out there. I wanted to move, to restart the engine, to run, but my body was frozen, paralyzed by instinct I couldn't ignore. I wasn't supposed to be here. The light above me pulsed once, and for a split second, the interior of the car was bathed in a brilliant, searing white. It wasn't just bright, it was overwhelming, like it was reaching inside me, pressing against my thoughts. The radio crackled back to life, but the static was different this time. It wasn't random noise, it was structured, rhythmic. The faint voices I'd heard earlier returned, louder now, layered upon one another in a cacophony of alien syllables. I glanced up through the windshield. The patterns within the light twisted into something new, something almost geometric, as though it was forming symbols I couldn't understand. They spun and shifted, growing faster and more intricate, each one burning itself into my mind like a fleeting nightmare. Then, everything stopped. The light froze mid-pulse, the pattern stilled, and the radio fell silent once again. It was as if the world had been paused, leaving me alone in a void where time no longer mattered. And in that silence, I heard it. A single, deliberate knock on the roof of the car. The car roared back to life without warning. One jarring sputter, and then the engine hummed steadily as if it had never stalled at all. My hands, clammy and trembling, gripped the wheel. I didn't think, I just drove, leaving the light and the suffocating silence behind. The glow receded in the rearview mirror, but my pulse remained erratic, my mind a storm of questions I wasn't ready to face. What had just happened? What was the light? What did it want? The road stretched ahead, its lines fading into the dark. Relief began to creep in as I put distance between myself and that terrible light. Then I saw it. An empty car sat on the shoulder, its nose angled awkwardly toward the ditch. The driver's door was open, swaying slightly in the breeze. It wasn't wrecked, there were no signs of a crash, just an abandoned vehicle left in pristine condition. I slowed as I approached, curiosity overriding fear. My headlights swept over the car, a late model sedan, glossy black, its windows darkened and clean. For a moment, I thought I saw movement inside, but when I rolled past, the interior was empty. Maybe they walked for help, I murmured, though the words felt hollow. Out here, in the middle of nowhere, walking would be madness. A quarter-mile further, another car came into view. This one was a rusted pickup, its hazard lights blinking weakly. Its tires were intact, the doors closed, and the engine still ticking faintly, as if it had been running moments ago. I pulled alongside, my unease deepening. No signs of struggle, no tracks in the dirt, nothing to suggest where the driver had gone. It was as though they had simply vanished. As I continued down the road, the empty vehicles became more frequent, scattered like breadcrumbs along a path I didn't want to follow. Sedans, trucks, motorcycles, they sat silently, pristine and eerie, each one more out of place than the last. My headlights caught the glint of something metallic on the ground next to a convertible. It was a phone, its screen cracked, lying inches from a half-empty coffee cup. Whatever had happened, it had happened quickly. I forced my eyes back to the road, gripping the wheel tighter. The cars were too perfect, too untouched, as if they'd been left here on purpose. And with each passing vehicle, the weight of their emptiness pressed harder against my chest. It was no longer a question of what had happened. It was a question of whether I'd be next. The next car stopped me cold. A silver minivan sat at a slight angle on the road's shoulder, its headlights dimly illuminating the surrounding brush. The driver's side door hung wide open, and a child's toy, a stuffed rabbit with a torn ear, lay on the asphalt beside it. I pulled over, unable to suppress the urge to investigate. The stillness of the night felt heavier now, oppressive, as though the plains themselves were watching. Leaving the engine idling, I stepped out of the car. The crunch of gravel under my boots sounded deafening in the silence. I approached the minivan cautiously, every instinct screaming that I shouldn't. The interior was a snapshot of interrupted life. A half-eaten sandwich sat on the passenger seat, a thin film of condensation on the wrapper. In the back, a child's car seat was unbuckled, its straps hanging loosely. A crumpled map lay on the floor, and scattered coins glittered faintly in the light from the dashboard. I ran a hand over the hood, expecting it to be cold, but it was warm, still radiating heat from a recently running engine. The air inside the vehicle smelled faintly of coffee and perfume, mingling with the faint tang of ozone. What happened here? I whispered, stepping back as my stomach twisted with unease. I turned toward the other cars I passed. The memory of their untouched exteriors gnawed at me, their pristine condition now taking on more sinister edge. Returning to my car, I drove a little farther, compelled by a morbid curiosity I couldn't suppress. Another car, a blue sedan, sat abandoned farther down the road. Its trunk was open, clothes and suitcases spilled out as though someone had been in a desperate rush to leave or to grab something they couldn't live without. Alone she rested on the edge of the road, its owner nowhere in sight. Nearby, a pair of sunglasses lay crookedly on the dashboard of a truck. Each car told the same story, life interrupted in an instant. No signs of violence, no blood, no damage. Just the eerie suggestion that the people had been plucked away, leaving only their belongings behind. It was as if the world had swallowed them whole. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The air around me seemed thicker now, pressing down on me from every direction. The cars, the empty, pristine cars, they had been abandoned in such haste, but why did it feel like something had made them vanish, not the drivers? And why did I feel like I was being watched? I glanced into my rearview mirror. Nothing. Just the long stretch of empty road behind me, shrouded in darkness. But then, in the corner of my eye, I saw it, a shadow, impossibly tall and thin, stretching across the road like a dark finger in the moonlight. It wasn't cast by anything I could see, no tree, no building, nothing that could account for it. It passed swiftly, moving like a wisp of smoke, blotting out the faint light from my rearview mirror for a fraction of a second. My breath hitched. I snapped my head around, eyes scanning the empty plain. The wind had died down completely, and all I could hear was the sound of my own heartbeat hammering in my chest. For a moment, I considered starting the car and just driving, speeding away from whatever this was, but I couldn't bring myself to turn the key. Something was holding me here. Something invisible, but real. Another shadow passed, this time across the windshield, moving too quickly for me to track with my eyes. My skin prickled, every nerve on high alert. The unease had now turned into something far darker, more primal. The sensation of being hunted. I reached for the door handle instinctively, my hand trembling, but I couldn't bring myself to open it. What if whatever was out there, whatever was watching me, was just waiting for me to step out? The thought made my throat dry and my mouth go cold. I swallowed hard, trying to rationalize. Maybe it was an animal, some large predator, a coyote, or a wild dog. But then again, why would it stay out of sight? Why would it move with such eerie precision, like it was avoiding being seen? I looked up again. The shadows didn't seem to be following any natural pattern anymore. They seemed to pulse, flicker, like smoke caught in an unseen wind. And every time I looked away, when I turned my eyes back to the road, the air around me felt denser, colder. It was as if the space around me was closing in. I wasn't just being watched. I was being studied. I turned the key and tried to start the engine. The car hesitated, coughed, and then roared to life. But as I pressed my foot to the accelerator, the sound of the engine was drowned out by something else, a soft, almost imperceptible thud, like something heavy landing just behind me. The car lurched forward, but I didn't dare look back. The road ahead stretched empty, and with every mile I covered, the sensation of being watched didn't fade, it only grew. My eyes darted back and forth, from the rear view to the side mirrors, every time hearing the slightest sound, expecting something, anything to appear in the periphery. But nothing did. The plains remained vast, still, and deserted. And then, it happened. The static returned. At first, it was just a faint crackle, like the whisper of wind brushing over the antenna, but soon it grew louder, more aggressive, as though the radio itself was fighting for control. The hum was all-encompassing, almost painful, and I felt it vibrate through my chest, rattling my bones. I reached for the dial instinctively, but it was useless. The static was overpowering, like a storm ripping through the airwaves. Then, amidst the noise, I heard it, a faint voice, almost drowned by the crackling. I leaned closer to the speaker, trying to make sense of it. Help. The word was barely audible, as if someone was speaking through a tin can. I froze. My heart slammed into my ribcage. It came again, louder this time. Help. Please. The voice, or whatever it was growing clearer, its tone distorted by the static, like something trying to claw its way through a wall. And then, another voice joined it. No longer faint, this one was guttural, a deep rasping growl that sounded almost inhuman. You are not alone. I yanked the dial to the left, desperate to drown out the noise, but the static only surged in response. The voices twisted, overlapping, fragments of syllables caught in the current, barely comprehensible. I tried again to turn the dial, but this time, the radio didn't respond. The whispers turned into a disjointed chant, repeating phrases I couldn't understand. It sounded like a language I'd never heard, broken words interspersed with guttural growls, their rhythm erratic and unhinged. Where are you? Waiting. Where are you? I slammed my hand against the dashboard, but the static didn't stop. The voices, now layered on top of each other, formed a sickening cacophony, twisting and stretching the words until they became something vile. They weren't speaking to me anymore, they were speaking through me. My chest tightened with dread as my eyes scanned the road ahead, but all I could see was the endless stretch of darkness, the glow from the rearview mirror now just a distant memory. The static rose higher, and for a moment I could almost make out a clearer voice, cutting through the distortion. Turn around. I felt my stomach drop. My hands trembled as I fought the impulse to turn the car around, to go back to the light, back to whatever it was that had pulled me into this nightmare. But I couldn't. I forced my eyes to stay ahead, but the whispers persisted, swirling in my ears, a cacophony of pleading, urging, demanding. You can't outrun it. The thought flashed through my mind. And in that moment, I wasn't sure if it was a whisper from the radio or something else entirely. Something closer. I didn't think. I couldn't think. The static was still clawing at my sanity, the voices a relentless assault against my fragile grip on reality. The radio crackled louder and louder, like 1,000 tortured souls screaming from the speakers. Turn around. The command, once a whisper, now blared in my ears, demanding my attention. My heart hammered against my chest. I had to get out. I had to leave. I slammed my foot onto the brake and threw the gear into park. With trembling hands, I turned the key in the ignition. The engine sputtered, hesitated, no, 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 and then it roared to life. I didn't even look behind me. Without thinking, I floored the gas pedal, tires screeching as the car lurched forward. The engine screamed in protest, but I didn't care. I just needed to go, needed to get away from this place, from whatever was watching, from the voices, anything. I glanced into the rearview mirror, hoping to see nothing but the empty stretch of road behind me. But that's not what I saw. The glow. It was there, unmistakable, creeping into view behind me, just beyond the horizon. At first, it was distant, like a fading star, but it was growing, intensifying with every second. I pushed the car harder, the speedometer climbing 60, 70, 80 miles per hour. The light followed. It wasn't just behind me anymore. The glow seemed to hover in the distance, always a few miles away, but no matter how fast I drove, it stayed within sight, growing brighter with each passing moment. There was no way it should be keeping up. The road stretched endlessly ahead, barren and desolate, and yet, there it was. My pulse quickened as I glanced up. It was closer now. Too close. It was no longer a light on the horizon. It was hovering just above the road, a bright, oppressive presence that swallowed the night around me. I tried to force my hands to steady themselves on the wheel, but they shook uncontrollably. Go faster, I whispered to myself. Just go faster. I pressed the accelerator harder, the car bucking under the strain as I pushed past 90 miles an hour, then 100. But the glow followed. It wasn't just a light anymore, it was a presence, like an oppressive weight in the air. It distorted the shadows on the ground, bending them, pulling them into twisted shapes, like long, black fingers creeping toward me. The car surged forward, but I could feel it, a pressure at the back of my mind, pulling, tugging, urging me to look away from the road. No. I couldn't. I wouldn't. The light surged ahead in my peripheral vision, now directly above me, hovering over the road, its brightness so intense that it threatened to blind me. The static on the radio flared again, and I could hear the whispers, clearer now, growing louder, no longer distorted. You can't escape. My breath caught in my throat, and I slammed my foot down harder on the pedal, as if sheer force could outrun it. But it was pointless. The glow moved with me. It was no longer a distant, intangible thing. It had become my reality, hanging in the sky, suffocating, consuming every inch of the road around me. I tried to focus, to push my fear aside, but it was impossible. The glow was everywhere now. The plains had disappeared. There was no horizon, no escape. Just the road and the oppressive, all-encompassing light that was swallowing the world whole. I could feel my heart racing, my pulse pounding in my ears. The radio was no longer static. It was a scream. You can't outrun it. And that's when I knew it wasn't just following me. It was waiting for me to stop. I could feel the air tightening around me as I sped down the empty road, my knuckles white from gripping the steering wheel. The light, now a blinding presence in the sky, followed me with terrifying precision, closing the distance between us with every second. No matter how fast I pushed the car, it remained right there, a few hundred yards above me, hovering with an unnerving slowness that suggested it was deliberate. I glanced at the speedometer, over 100 miles per hour. The engine was screaming, the car fighting to keep up, but the light seemed unaffected by my frantic efforts. It was as if it were waiting, watching, letting me think I was escaping before it slowly reeled me in. I could see it now, pulsing in the air like a heartbeat, radiating an unnatural energy that made my skin crawl. The air around me felt heavier, charged, and I could taste the metal tang of fear in the back of my throat. I pressed the gas pedal harder. The road stretched endlessly ahead, the monotonous line of asphalt swallowed by darkness, and still, the light came closer. Too close. Each time I glanced into the rearview mirror, it seemed larger, its edges becoming more defined, and the color shifting from a soft white to something more insidious, a sickly yellow-orange that flickered like an old light bulb about to burn out. It cast strange shadows across the plains, shadows that didn't belong, twisting and stretching unnaturally as if the light itself was bending reality around it. For a fleeting moment, I thought of pulling off the road, ducking into the shelter of the trees or driving off the beaten path, but I couldn't. The very idea felt wrong. My body tensed at the thought of straying from the road, of leaving the path open to something else. Something that might be waiting out there, out of sight but closer than I realized. I pressed harder on the accelerator, my vision blurring from the speed, the world outside becoming nothing more than streaks of darkness and flickers of light. But the glow was right there, overhead, its presence now so powerful that it distorted the air around it, creating waves of heat that shimmered in the distance. Every few seconds, I thought I saw figures moving in the periphery of my vision, dark shapes on the edges of the plains, shifting in and out of the shadows. But when I looked directly, they were gone. I didn't dare look for long. It was closing in. There was no question now. The light wasn't just trailing me, it was hunting me. I could feel the way it tugged at my consciousness, the way it filled my thoughts with its oppressive energy. It wanted me. I glanced up again. It was closer now, so close I could see the details, the way it undulated, like a living thing, pulsating rhythmically, an otherworldly heartbeat. My breath came in shallow gasps. I tried to focus, tried to think of something else, anything to distract me from the terrifying certainty that the light had no intention of letting me escape. The radio sputtered back to life, static crackling violently, but this time there was something different about it. Amidst the noise, I could hear a voice. Not the whispering voices from before, but something more demanding, insistent. It felt like it was speaking directly to me. You can't hide. You can't outrun it. The words sent a chill through me, crawling up my spine. I slammed my hand against the radio dial, turning it off, but the voice lingered. I couldn't shake it, couldn't stop it from echoing in my mind, repeating over and over like a mantra. You can't outrun it. I felt my pulse quicken as the car surged forward, the light drawing closer with each passing second, its movement almost alive. It wasn't just following me anymore, it was part of the landscape, part of the night itself, alive with intent. The very air seemed to bend around it, a force that pulled at the world itself. The road was stretching, endless, and yet all I could think of was the light that had no end. It was as if the light was feeding on the space around me, devouring the night itself. My mind screamed for release, for a way out, but the only thing that remained was the thundering pulse of the light, its deliberate chase closing in. And that's when I realized the light wasn't just following me, it was preparing to take me. The light overhead was unbearable now, its pulsating glow reflecting off the windshield and waves, distorting my view of the road ahead. It wasn't just following me anymore, it was consuming me, slowly but surely, until there was nothing left but it. The radio, despite being turned off, seemed to hum in the back of my skull, an oppressive reminder of the voices that once spoke to me. You can't hide. You can't outrun it. As I pushed the car faster, my heart thudding in my chest, a strange feeling began to settle over me. It wasn't just fear this time, it was something else, something familiar, like a memory stirring from deep within me. I tried to shake it off, but the more I tried to focus on the road, the stronger the sensation became. And then, without warning, the memories began. They didn't come in any logical sequence, no gradual unfolding of events. Instead, they hit me all at once, fragmented, disjointed. Flickering flashes of faces, places, and sounds. I couldn't tell if they were real memories, or if they were simply projections of my mind born from the overwhelming terror that gripped me. A woman, her face pale, eyes wide with terror, reaching out toward me. A man, his car stopped in the middle of the road, the door open, but no one inside. The smell of burning rubber and metal, the sound of a car engine dying, and then silence. The fleeting image of a child's hand pressed against the glass of a car window, but the car was empty. The child was gone. No. No, no, no. I tried to focus, tried to push the images away, but they came faster now, relentless and sharp. Each one like a jolt to my system, a fragmented scene pulled from some other time, some other place. Faces I didn't recognize, voices I couldn't place. But there was one constant in every flash, the same eerie, empty road. The same abandoned cars. The same terrifying glow. In one vision, I saw a man. He was running, panicked, his breath ragged. His eyes darted back over his shoulder, searching for something that wasn't there but was close. The next moment, his figure flickered, the shadows growing longer, darker, until he disappeared completely. I felt the cold grip of panic tighten around my chest as another memory surged to the forefront. A car, not too different from my own, sitting on the side of the road, its engine running. I could hear the faint hum of the radio, the voice still garbled by static. A woman's voice, calling out for help, but no one answered. Help me, please. It wasn't my voice. It wasn't anyone I knew. Yet the desperation in that voice, the fear, it felt like it was mine. The light above me flared brighter, intensifying as the memories spun faster, more frenzied. Faces of strangers flickered in the glow, their eyes wide with terror, pleading for something or someone, but they were just shadows now, disappearing as quickly as they appeared. I felt the world around me warping, twisting, like I was no longer driving our road, but drifting through someone else's past. I shook my head, desperately trying to clear the vision. But it only grew worse. The memories, if they even were memories, tore through me like jagged shards of glass, each one cutting deeper. They were all connected. They all led back to this road. To this light. The faint smell of gasoline filled my nose, sharp and bitter, and suddenly, the image of an overturned car appeared in front of me, its tires spinning uselessly in the air, the metal creaking under the weight of something unseen. The car's windows were shattered, but inside, there was nothing but emptiness. The light flickered again. It was as if the memories weren't just about what had happened before, they were warning me. I was becoming a part of them. A fragment of the past, sucked into the same pattern, the same fate. The people who had driven this road before me, had they been just like me? Running, fleeing, trapped by something they couldn't understand, just like I was now? Had they seen this light, felt the same cold, overwhelming pull, and thought they could escape? A sudden wave of dizziness overtook me. I squeezed my eyes shut, but it didn't help. The images were still there, flashing behind my eyelids. People disappearing. Faces, voices, memories, like a reel of film spinning too fast to follow. I wasn't just seeing what had happened, I was becoming part of it. The car veered slightly off course, and for a terrifying moment, I thought I might crash. But no, somehow, I kept it straight. The wheel turned instinctively in my hands, as if my body knew what to do, even if my mind didn't. And then, just as suddenly as they had started, the flashes stopped. The memories faded, leaving only a lingering sense of loss, of emptiness. The light, however, didn't fade. It was still there, still hanging overhead, pulsing like a heartbeat. And now, I knew. The light was not just chasing me. It was feeding off me. And I was becoming a part of its endless cycle. I barely registered the sound of the tires screeching as I slammed on the brakes, bringing the car to a jolting halt. The light, the relentless, pulsating light, was still there, hovering above me. But something had changed. It was as if the air itself had thickened, weighed down by the strange, growing presence that surrounded me. For the first time since I had been driving, the car felt still, as if it had entered some suspended moment in time, caught in a place where the world was too quiet, too heavy. The road stretched ahead, untouched and endless, but something had caught my eye. At first, it seemed like a trick of the light, just another illusion. But as I looked closer, I realized it wasn't. There, on the pavement, were markings. They weren't like anything I'd ever seen before. At first glance, they appeared to be nothing more than faded scratches, lines crisscrossing each other in chaotic patterns, but there was something about them. They weren't random. They weren't accidental. They were deliberate. I got out of the car, almost against my will, the unease curling in my stomach like a living thing. The static was still buzzing in my ears, faint but constant. I forced myself to ignore it, to focus on what lay in front of me. The symbols on the road were glowing faintly now, soft, almost ethereal, like they were pulling the light from the air itself. At first, I thought they were reflections, the light playing tricks on my eyes, but as I crouched down closer, I could see that they weren't. They were etched into the pavement, the edges of each line smooth and deliberate. The light didn't just illuminate them, it seemed to feed off them, flickering in time with their glow, as if the two were connected. The symbols weren't anything familiar. They weren't letters, numbers, or any kind of script I recognized. They seemed alien. Some were curved, others sharp, like arrows, circles, and triangles intertwined in strange, hypnotic patterns. There were spirals, loops, and jagged edges that spiraled inward, as if they were meant to draw you in, to trap your mind within their endless loops. A chill ran down my spine as I reached out, almost involuntarily, to touch one of them. The moment my fingers brushed the pavement, a sharp twinge shot through my hand, like an electric shock that traveled up my arm and into my chest. I yanked my hand back, heart racing, but the sensation didn't fade. The shock was still there, lingering in my bones. The air around me hummed with the same energy I had felt before, electric, unnatural. I looked around, but the road stretched on, empty and desolate, just like before. There was no sign of any other car, no indication of any other presence. Just me and the symbols, alone on a forgotten stretch of highway, bathed in the eerie glow of the light above. What are these? The question echoed in my mind, louder than any voice could scream. My mind scrambled for answers, for some logical explanation, but there was none. There was only these markings, glowing faintly in the still night, as if they had always been here, waiting for me. I glanced back toward the car. The engine was still running, but the air had grown colder, sharper, the shadows stretching longer, as if the world itself was beginning to fold in on itself. The light in the sky hadn't moved. It just hung there, watching, waiting. Another look at the symbols. They were different now. Where I had once seen only chaotic lines, I could now see movement in them, tiny shifts, like the markings were alive, breathing. The lines seemed to pulse, expanding and contracting in rhythm with the light, as if the two were in perfect sync, part of the same dark force, a pattern I couldn't understand. I took a hesitant step back. And that's when I saw it. A figure, barely perceptible, standing just beyond the glow. It was the faintest outline at first, nothing more than a shadow stretching across the ground, but as I blinked, it became clearer. A person? No, not a person. Something else. A figure too tall, too thin, with long limbs and an unnatural stance. Its face, or what I could make out of it, was smooth, featureless, just like the empty void in the sky. I didn't want to look at it. My body screamed to run, to get back in the car and drive away, but I couldn't move. The pull of the light, the pull of the markings, kept me rooted to the spot. The figure didn't move. It simply stood there, still as the road beneath me, but I could feel its presence seeping into my mind, feeding off my fear. And then, the symbols on the road began to glow brighter. The lines seemed to grow, stretching out across the pavement, expanding outward in every direction. They were encroaching, slowly, like tendrils reaching out to pull me back into the depths of whatever strange force was controlling them. The figure didn't need to move. The markings did its work for it. And suddenly, I knew I wasn't just standing on the road anymore. I was standing on a place that didn't belong in this world. I was standing on a point where reality was thinner, weaker, and I could feel it all breaking apart around me. The glow, the figure, the markings, they were all part of something bigger, something that didn't just want to watch me. It wanted to take me. A sharp wind picked up, biting and cold, and with it came a sound, like the wind itself was whispering in my ear. It wasn't words, no, it was something worse. A low, constant hum that vibrated through my chest, resonating deep within me. You are part of it now. The words were clear. Not in my ears, but in my mind. The markings glowed brighter, pulsing. The figure didn't move. And still, I stood there, trapped. For a moment, I thought I saw the road stretching into eternity, with the symbols expanding infinitely. No escape. No way out. And then, the car door slammed shut behind me. I don't know how long I stood there. Time felt irrelevant. The glow above me, the markings, the figure, they were all pressing in, suffocating the space around me. I needed to move. Needed to find somewhere, anywhere, to escape, or I would lose my mind. My legs felt like they were made of stone, unwilling to carry me, as if they had grown roots into the cracked pavement. But finally, my body screamed louder than my fear, and I managed to pull myself away from the markings, away from the ever-encroaching presence of whatever was lurking in the dark. With trembling hands, I fumbled for the car door, forcing it open and sliding inside, slamming it shut behind me. My heart hammered in my chest as I started the engine. The light above me didn't move. It didn't chase me this time. It just hung there, pulsing with a rhythm that mirrored my pulse. But the road stretched ahead, silent and endless. I had no destination in mind. I only knew that I needed to drive. I didn't care where I was going, as long as it was away from that place. But the road seemed to mock me. Every mile I put between myself and the markings felt like nothing, as if the distance didn't matter. The landscape, barren and flat, passed by in monotonous waves. No trees. No buildings. Just the endless horizon, stretching in every direction. And then, like a beacon in the dark, I saw it. A shape in the distance. A structure, small, but it was something. I didn't think. I just steered the car toward it, relief flooding through me as I realized that I wasn't as alone as I had been moments ago. It was a diner. Old, run down, and surrounded by nothing but the open plain. The flickering neon sign read Tina's Roadside Cafe in faded red letters, barely visible in the dark. The windows were cracked, and the door hung crooked, as if it hadn't been used in years. But it was shelter. It was a place to hide. I parked the car outside, the headlights cutting through the gloom, and hesitated before stepping out. My breath came in sharp, erratic bursts, the chill of the air biting at my skin as I wrapped my jacket tighter around me. I forced my legs to move, one step at a time, until I reached the diner door. The hinges creaked as I pushed it open, the smell of stale air and dust hitting me like a slap. Inside, the diner looked just as abandoned as it had seemed from the outside. Empty booths, overturned chairs, and the occasional broken lamp swinging from the ceiling. The counter was covered in grime, and the menu board was so old the chalk had long since faded. But it was safe. At least, for now. I stepped in, heart still racing, and immediately locked the door behind me. I wasn't sure what I expected, someone, anything, but the silence that greeted me was oppressive, heavy with the sense that I was alone in a place that had been forgotten by the world. I moved further in, my footsteps echoing on the cracked tile floor, and took a seat at the counter. There, in the faint light that managed to filter through the grimy windows, I tried to steady myself. I forced my breathing to slow, tried to piece together the fragments of what had happened. It was the symbols. The figure. The glow. The fear began to creep back, creeping up my spine like an invisible hand, but I pushed it down. I had to think. I had to make sense of this. Was it all connected? The abandoned cars. The strange markings. The light that followed me. The figure I'd seen in the distance. Were they all part of the same thing? My mind raced in 1,000 directions at once, but the questions only seemed to spiral, growing louder and more chaotic with every passing moment. I needed answers. But how? Where could I find them? The air in the diner felt thick, charged with something I couldn't identify. The faint hum from the radio, still playing in the background, seemed to pulse in time with the anxiety rising within me. The static buzzed in my ears, almost familiar now, like a presence that had become part of the world around me. It wasn't the radio itself, no, it was something deeper. Something that resonated inside me, like a vibration in my bones. I glanced around, but there was nothing. No sign of life. No sign of anything. Suddenly, I felt it. The shift. The stillness had changed. The air had thickened, as though something had entered, something unseen. I could feel it, right behind me, in the dim light that barely reached the back of the diner. My heart leapt into my throat. I turned around. Nothing. Just the shadows stretching long across the walls. But the feeling was unmistakable. I wasn't alone. I swallowed hard, pushing the rising panic back down. I was trapped here, surrounded by empty space and haunted memories. I had no idea what was out there, no idea what had happened to me, to everyone who had passed through this place. But one thing was certain, the light hadn't just followed me from the road. It was here, too. And it wouldn't stop. Not until it had taken everything. I don't know how much time passed. It could have been minutes, or it could have been hours. I was so caught up in my thoughts, trying to calm myself, trying to breathe, that I lost track of everything else. But then I saw it. At first, it was just a flicker. A movement. A shadow crossing the edge of my vision. But when I turned to look, my breath hitched in my chest. Through the cracked window of the diner, just beyond the parking lot, I saw the shape. A figure. Tall, impossibly thin, like a man but not. Its outline was indistinct, as if it were made of the darkness itself, blending into the night. It stood perfectly still under the harsh light that hung in the sky, the light, the one that had been following me. My heart stuttered in my chest, and my pulse quickened. The figure didn't move, didn't blink, didn't even seem to breathe. It just stood there, at the far edge of the diner parking lot, staring straight ahead into the night. I froze, unable to tear my eyes away. I didn't want to look. I didn't want to acknowledge it. But it was there, and I couldn't deny it any longer. For a moment, the air around me felt suffocating, thick, as if the very atmosphere of the diner was pressing in, crushing me. The shadows in the corners seemed to grow darker, the quiet stretching out in unnatural silence. My hand instinctively reached for my phone, but my fingers shook so badly I couldn't hold it steady. I needed to get out. I couldn't stay here. This place, this diner, had become a cage, a trap. The figure outside, standing motionless, was a part of it. I knew that now. The light above, the same one that had followed me from the road, seemed to pulse stronger, brighter, making the figure visible in sharp contrast against the darkness of the plains. I tried to look away, to distract myself, but my eyes kept being drawn back to it. It didn't move. It didn't speak. But I could feel it. I could feel its presence, its coldness creeping into my skin, burrowing deep into my bones. It was as if it was waiting for me to do something, anything. But I had no idea what. What is it? The question burned in my mind. What did it want? Was it even human? I strained my eyes, trying to see the figure more clearly, but the shadows around it seemed to blur and twist, as if the air itself were warping. It was like looking through a fog, a distortion that made everything seem farther away than it was. I thought I saw something, movement, just for a split second. A shift in its posture. The figure seemed to straighten, standing taller, as if it had sensed my gaze. And then, I saw it, its head. It turned. Slowly. I couldn't breathe. The figure's face, if it could even be called that, was a void. A smooth, featureless surface, like polished stone or glass, reflecting the light in eerie, unnatural ways. I could see nothing in its eyes, nothing in its expression, just emptiness. My stomach churned. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything to escape the suffocating grip of fear tightening around my throat, but my legs wouldn't move. My body wouldn't respond. The figure didn't step closer. It didn't walk toward me, but I could feel its presence shifting, closing in around the diner, surrounding it like a storm-gathering force. The very air felt heavy with its weight. I snapped out of my trance, my hand gripping the counter so tightly my knuckles turned white. My mind raced, trying to find any logical explanation, any reason for the terror that gripped my heart, but I couldn't. I couldn't make sense of it. I couldn't understand any of it. Maybe it's not real. The thought flickered in my mind, but it was instantly dismissed. The figure was too real, too solid, too present. And then, for a moment, just a fleeting moment, the figure moved. Not forward, but upward. It seemed to stretch toward the sky, lifting its long, thin arms toward the pulsing light. I could see the air around it ripple, the light bending in response, as if it were drawing the energy from the sky itself. It wasn't just standing under the light anymore. It was becoming the light. I stumbled back from the counter, my legs giving out beneath me. I collapsed into one of the booths, my breathing shallow, my head spinning. I had to get out. I had to leave, but the car was outside, and that thing was between me and freedom. I couldn't stay in the diner, but I couldn't move either. The figure was there. The light was there. And in the distance, I thought I saw more shapes, more shadows, flickering in the darkness, like whispers of something much worse. I was caught. Trapped in a place where the lines between reality and nightmare blurred, where the rules no longer applied. The figure had stopped moving. It was back to its original stance, motionless, watching. But I could feel the change in the air. Something had shifted. I wasn't just a witness anymore. I was part of the story. And the ending? The ending was closing in fast. I don't know how much time has passed. It could be minutes. It could be days. My mind is unraveling. Every second feels like an eternity, and yet, when I try to measure time, it slips away like water through my fingers. I can't focus. My thoughts keep fraying, drifting off in different directions, like pieces of a puzzle that don't quite fit together. The air around me is wrong. It's thick, dense, as if the very atmosphere itself is pressing down, squeezing me. The space inside the diner feels smaller, the walls closing in on me. I can't seem to get enough air. My chest tightens with each breath, as if I'm inhaling something other than oxygen. It's quiet. Too quiet. The sounds from outside, the wind, the distant hum of the road, the soft creak of the diner settling, have all vanished. There's only the silence. But it's not a peaceful silence. It's oppressive, like something is waiting. Like the very stillness is a predator, poised to strike. I try to call out, but my voice feels muffled, as if it's being swallowed by the air itself. I'm here, in this place, but it doesn't feel like I'm really here. It's like the diner has become a dream, or worse, a memory, a place I've already left behind without even realizing it. I blink, trying to shake the fog in my mind. The walls should be real, shouldn't they? The counter should be real. But I reach out to touch it, and my hand passes through the surface for a split second, like I'm trying to touch smoke. I jerk my hand back, my heart hammering in my chest. What's happening to me? I try to focus, to gather my thoughts, but the world keeps slipping out of my grasp. The diner itself seems to sway, just a little, like it's afloat in something intangible. The flickering neon sign outside, the one that says Tina's Roadside Cafe, is distorted, the words twisting and stretching like a reflection in water, pulling away from me with each blink. I rub my eyes, trying to clear the dizziness in my head, but when I open them again, everything is different. The light outside, the one that had been hovering above the diner, is no longer there. In its place is something darker, more foreboding. A deep, impenetrable blackness. It's as if the very air has been swallowed by the dark. I stand up abruptly, my legs shaky, the floor beneath me seeming to shift. I grip the counter, trying to steady myself. The room around me is pulsing, the walls breathing with a rhythm I can't understand. My head spins as I look out the window again. The parking lot is empty. Too empty. The abandoned cars from earlier have vanished. The road beyond the diner is gone, replaced by a thick, swirling fog that seems to stretch forever, undisturbed by any movement, as though time itself has frozen. This can't be real. I force myself to move, to make sense of the impossible, but each step feels like I'm sinking deeper into the ground. I move toward the door, desperate to escape the suffocating atmosphere of the diner. My hand wraps around the knob, and I hesitate for just a moment. It's not right. The door is cold. Unnaturally cold. I should be able to feel the chill of the night air when I open it, but the coldness seeps from the door itself, as if the outside world has ceased to exist. I swallow hard, my throat dry and tight, and I push it open. The moment I step outside, the air changes. It's not the crisp chill of the night that hits me, it's something else, something unnatural. It's as if the entire landscape has shifted. The ground beneath my feet feels unstable, like walking on loose sand, but it's solid. Too solid. I look up, and there, suspended above me, is the light. The one I've been running from. But it's different now. It's larger. Closer. It pulses like a heartbeat, its rhythm matching mine, and with each throb, the world around me warps. The stars above are gone, replaced by a vast, swirling darkness, like a tear in the fabric of the sky. I can feel it now, the pull. It's drawing me in, pulling at my very being, as if the light wants me to come closer. But I know better. I know that the moment I do, the moment I step into that light, everything will be over. I can't explain it. I can't even understand it. But I feel it deep inside me, the urge to flee, to run away from this distorted reality. I stagger back toward the door of the diner, but as I move, the ground shifts again, this time in the opposite direction. The diner seems farther away, the distance stretching with each step I take. It's getting harder to move, harder to breathe. The air is thickening again, heavier this time, suffocating me, and I can feel my mind beginning to unravel. I close my eyes, trying to steady myself. But when I open them again, the world has changed once more. I'm no longer standing outside. I'm back inside the diner. But everything is wrong. The walls are different, the chairs and tables rearranged in ways I don't remember. The flickering light of the neon sign is gone, everything is gone. I'm trapped. Trapped in this place, in this endless loop. And I don't know how to escape. The question echoes in my mind, louder now, am I going mad? Or is this just the beginning of something much, much worse? I couldn't make sense of it. My head was spinning, my thoughts fragmented like shattered glass. I had to get out, had to escape, but something kept drawing me back to the empty parking lot. I took a tentative step toward the door of the diner again, hoping that stepping out might shake me from this nightmare, but the weight of the air felt unbearable. As I reached for the handle, something caught my eye. A car. It wasn't there before. I was certain of it. My heart skipped a beat as I squinted into the distance. A dark figure, unmistakably a car, stood at the far edge of the parking lot. It was parked in the exact spot where the abandoned vehicles had been before they disappeared. I froze, my hand hovering over the door. It looked like my car. The same model. Same color. Same dent on the front fender from a run-in with a guardrail last winter. It couldn't be. But it was. My body moved before my brain could catch up. I stumbled forward, my legs unsteady beneath me, as if drawn to it by some unseen force. The car sat there, unmoving, in the dim light of the diner's flickering sign. The engine was off, the windows rolled up, but the driver's seat was conspicuously empty. I wasn't sure why, but a cold chill ran down my spine. Something about it didn't sit right. The more I stared at the car, the more wrong it seemed. The doors were locked, and the headlights weren't on. It looked perfectly normal, too normal, considering where I was. Considering what was happening. I felt a sinking sensation in my stomach, a gnawing sense that I was missing something. But then, as I moved closer, I noticed something else. A detail that sent my pulse racing. There were no tire tracks leading to the car. No sign of movement. Nothing that indicated it had just appeared. It was as if the car had materialized out of thin air, placed there deliberately, like some twisted reflection of my own. I couldn't stop myself from looking inside. The interior was exactly as I'd left it. The seat was slightly adjusted to my height, the dashboard cluttered with old receipts and maps, a half-empty coffee cup in the cup holder. I even saw the faint outline of my jacket draped over the passenger seat. But the most chilling part was the empty driver's seat. The seat where I should have been. The seat where I had been. I stood there, staring at the car for what felt like an eternity. The quiet seemed to press in from all sides, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, my breath coming faster, heavier. There was a part of me that wanted to run, to turn around and go back inside the diner, but my feet were rooted to the ground. I couldn't tear my eyes away. Then, a sudden movement. It was subtle at first, just a slight shift in the shadows around the car. But when I blinked, I saw it. The driver's seat, the empty seat, seemed to be shifting. It wasn't much, just a tiny adjustment, like someone had sat down in it, but it was enough to make my blood run cold. I'm not crazy. I'm not imagining this. I took a step forward. Another. My mind screamed at me to stop, to turn back, but I couldn't. Something inside me, something primal, was telling me I needed to know what was going on. I needed to understand this. As I reached the door of the car, I heard it. A sound. A low, rasping breath. It came from inside the vehicle, from the driver's seat. I couldn't make out the words, but I could hear the sound, an exhale, slow and deliberate, as if someone was watching me. The breath was ragged, uneven, like it didn't belong. I yanked the door open, my hand shaking as I fumbled with the handle. The cold air hit me like a slap in the face. Empty. The seat was still empty. I felt my pulse hammering in my throat. The breath, that breath, wasn't just a figment of my imagination. It was real. I leaned inside the car, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, and stared at the empty seat. I expected to see someone, anyone, but there was no one there. The seat was cold and unoccupied, just like the rest of the car. I backed away slowly, feeling a wave of nausea wash over me. The sound of the breath, the movement I thought I'd seen, it was all playing tricks on me. But deep down, in my gut, I knew it wasn't. Something was wrong. Something had happened to that seat. To the car. To me. I turned away, my body moving in a panic. But just as I started to walk back toward the diner, I heard it again. The breath. A deep, steady inhale from the driver's seat. I didn't look back. I couldn't stop moving, my feet carrying me away from the car, away from the sound that had rattled me to my core. My pulse was a thunderstorm in my chest, my hands shaking so violently I couldn't even wipe the sweat from my brow. I had to get out. I had to leave before whatever that thing, whatever was in that car, decided to do more than just watch me. But as I stumbled back toward the diner, trying to convince myself that I was just imagining things, a voice came. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even a whisper in the ear. It was something much closer. A voice in my mind. Leave, before it takes you too. I froze. The words echoed in my head, soft but clear. They weren't my thoughts. They weren't even from outside my mind. The voice felt like it was inside, like it had been waiting there, pressing against my consciousness for God knows how long. The moment I heard it, the weight of the air around me seemed to double. I felt something heavy, like a presence, looming just out of sight, pulling at the very fabric of my thoughts. I tried to push the voice away. I squeezed my eyes shut, shaking my head, telling myself I was losing it. That this couldn't be happening. It couldn't be real. But the voice didn't fade. It's too late for you now. The words came with an unshakable certainty, the kind that fills you with cold dread, making you question everything you thought you knew. I could feel my heart pounding in my throat, my breathing ragged and shallow. Who's there? I thought, but the words didn't leave my lips. The voice was in me, answering without needing to be spoken. You need to run. The urgency in the voice was unmistakable. It wasn't just a suggestion, it was a command. And yet, my legs wouldn't move. My feet were stuck, frozen to the ground as if the earth itself was holding me in place. It's already watching you. My blood ran cold. The words hit me like a slap in the face, but the panic was too strong to even react. I turned to look behind me, but I couldn't see anything. There was no one there, no figure lurking in the shadows, no movement in the parking lot. Just the oppressive darkness and the distant hum of the wind. But the voice remained, clear and insistent. Leave, or it will take you too. I took a step back, my legs trembling, the weight of the voice still echoing in my mind. I could feel the presence, the pressure, growing stronger, pressing down on me from all sides. My chest tightened as if the very air was suffocating me. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but every part of my body rebelled, frozen in terror. The words kept repeating, looping over and over in my head like a broken record. Leave, before it takes you too. I tried to ignore it. I told myself it was just fear, just the stress of being in an impossible situation. But something deep inside me knew it wasn't just my mind playing tricks. It knows I'm here. The realization sent a chill through my spine. Whatever had taken the others, whatever had left their cars, their empty lives behind, was still here. Watching. waiting. I forced myself to take another step back, my legs still trembling, the air thick with a palpable dread. I didn't want to look behind me. I didn't want to see if the figure from the car, or the shadow I thought I'd glimpsed earlier, was real. But I couldn't help it. I turned, my heart in my throat, and for the briefest moment, I saw it. Just a flicker. A shape. Standing in the distance, under the same dim light that had hovered above the diner before, just far enough away that I couldn't make out any details. But I could feel it. I could feel the presence, looming like an impenetrable shadow. It was waiting. The voice surged again, louder this time, its warning more urgent. Run. It's coming. My legs obeyed before I could fully process the command. I turned and sprinted toward the diner, my breath ragged, the world around me warping with every step. The ground beneath me seemed to shift, like it was trying to pull me down, to trap me in this place. The door to the diner was within reach, but the light was closer now, too close. I didn't look back. I couldn't. But I felt it, the presence, growing behind me. Closer. Faster. It was right there, just at the edge of my vision, like a dark cloud that was descending, closing in on me from every direction. I burst through the door, my chest heaving with panic. But when I looked around, the diner was the same. Nothing had changed. No shadowy figure. No signs of movement. But the silence had deepened. It was a silence that held the weight of something unseen. And the voice? It was still there, faint now, but unyielding. It's here. It's coming for you. I stumbled back, my body shaking as the realization sank in. I wasn't going to escape this. Whatever had taken those before me, whatever had warned me, was closing in. And it wasn't going to stop until I was gone too. I slammed my fist against the door. Nothing. The door wouldn't budge. I tried again, harder this time, my breath coming faster as panic clawed its way up my throat. I was trapped. The voice, the presence, it was closing in, and now I couldn't even leave the diner. The door felt solid, unyielding, as if it had become part of the very walls themselves. The light. I could see it now, hovering just outside the diner window. It wasn't a faint glow anymore. It was a presence, a blinding, pulsating mass of light, shifting and humming with an unnatural energy. The way it floated in place, as if suspended by some invisible force, made my skin crawl. I backed away from the door, my heart hammering. My mind raced with 1,000 thoughts, none of them making sense. Why couldn't I get out? Why wouldn't the door open? I turned, searching for another exit, a back door, anything. But the diner was small. Too small. There were no other exits. No windows that would offer a way out. I was stuck in a small, suffocating box, surrounded by the soundless hum of the light that now pulsed steadily, like a heartbeat, just beyond my reach. It was getting closer. I could feel it. The air had thickened. It felt like the walls themselves were pressing in on me, slowly closing the distance between me and whatever was outside. I thought I saw something, someone, moving in the glow, just behind the light's pulsing waves. A shadowed figure, vague and indistinct, standing motionless in the glow's soft halo. I turned back to the door, gritting my teeth as I tried again, yanking with every ounce of strength I had left. Nothing. No. Please, no. I pounded on the door once more, my palms stinging, my breath shallow and panicked. The diner had become a cage, and the light outside felt like it was waiting for me to make the wrong move. I could sense it. It was waiting for me to slip up, to let my guard down. It was taunting me. Why won't the door open? I thought, my mind reeling with confusion. Every time I tried to rationalize it, the world around me seemed to twist, to distort. This place, the diner, the light, the feeling of being watched, none of it made sense anymore. The figure outside was moving. It wasn't much, just a subtle shift of shadow, but I could see it now, edging closer. As the figure came into focus, I felt my stomach churn. It was tall, almost impossibly tall, with long limbs that seemed too thin, too elongated. The outline of a human form, but distorted in a way I couldn't quite comprehend. And then, it was right there. No. I couldn't look at it anymore. I turned away, stumbling backward across the diner, my mind screaming for me to do something. I looked around the room. The diner was still unchanged, except for the heavy, suffocating atmosphere that had settled in, thick as tar. The tables and chairs were the same, rusted, abandoned, forgotten, but they felt more like obstacles now, as if they were closing in on me too. I can't stay here. I can't. I pressed myself against the far wall, trying to steady my breathing, trying to think clearly. But nothing came. The light outside grew brighter. The figure was there, moving closer. Its silhouette blurred at the edges, flickering as if it were part of the light itself, merging with it, becoming one. I felt something inside me snap. I ran for the back of the diner, hoping for some miracle, some way out, but the door there wouldn't open either. It was locked. And the moment I tried to force it, I heard it. A sound. A deep, resonant hum, like something ancient and mechanical, vibrating through the walls. The walls began to shake. The glow outside flared brighter, brighter than the sun. The air burned with it, thick and hot, as if the light itself was absorbing all the oxygen in the room. I spun around, fear gripping my chest, and that's when I saw it. The thing. It had moved into the diner. I couldn't comprehend it at first. My brain couldn't process what I was seeing. The figure that had stood outside the window was now here, inside the diner, its presence stretching. Impossibly tall against the ceiling. Its form was not human anymore, not entirely. It had morphed, twisted, shifting like liquid shadows. It hovered there, suspended in the air, its hollow eyes locked onto mine. And then, just as suddenly, the voice returned. It's here. And it will take you too. I stumbled backward, my legs giving out beneath me. There was nowhere to go. No escape. I was trapped in a nightmare, with no way out. The door, the light, it was the only thing left. The only thing I hadn't tried. I turned, desperate. My body ached with exhaustion, but I rushed toward the light that hovered outside the diner. But as I reached for it, the door refused to open. It remained solid, impenetrable, as though the diner itself was a barrier, sealing me in. The sound of the light outside seemed to grow louder, vibrating through the walls, shaking my very bones. I collapsed to the floor, gasping for air, my mind unraveling. It's too late. It's already too late. And then, as the light surrounded me, I heard a soft, final whisper in my mind. It will take you too. I didn't have time to scream. One moment, I was on the floor of the diner, gasping, my eyes locked on the shimmering light that filled the room, and the next, the world was yanked away from me. A force, cold, sharp, and impossible to resist, ripped through the air and pulled me upward. My stomach lurched as if gravity itself had decided to abandon me. I didn't understand what was happening, but my body reacted instinctively, flailing, trying to grasp onto anything that might ground me. But there was nothing. The diner, the walls, the tables, the floor, all of it was gone. I couldn't feel the floor beneath my feet anymore. I couldn't hear the hum of the light, or even the desperate sound of my own breath. All I knew was that I was being pulled, sucked, yanked through the air like a rag doll in a storm. The sensation was suffocating, as though every breath I took was being stolen from me. The air was thick, cloying, and it stung my lungs with every inhale. It was as though I was being drawn into a vortex, a black hole where time didn't exist. I couldn't make sense of what I was seeing. The world around me spun, warping, stretching, folding in on itself, and then I saw it. The light. It had come with me, but it was no longer just outside the diner. It had swallowed me whole, wrapped itself around my body and soul like an electric current. The blinding pulse of it was no longer distant, it was inside me, in my blood, in my thoughts. It was inside me. And then, the shapes. Out of the corners of my vision, I saw them, shadows. Figures. Flickers of movement. They were all around me, swirling in the light, but they weren't human. They were twisted. Their forms stretched and bent in ways that defied logic. Some were jagged, like broken glass, others were formless, just fleeting impressions of what they might have once been. I reached out in desperation, hoping to touch something solid. But instead of finding anything real, my hand passed through empty space. I was weightless. How is this happening? My mind screamed, but there were no answers. The pressure on my chest intensified, the feeling of being pulled deeper into something unfathomable, something wrong. I couldn't breathe. The air itself was suffocating me. I felt as though I was drowning in nothingness, my body pinned in place by some unseen force. My limbs were useless, numb, like they no longer belonged to me. The disorienting sensation twisted my stomach into knots. My head spun, but I couldn't escape it. I saw my car. It was so distant now, an insignificant shape far below me, drifting like a forgotten memory. The diner was gone. The familiar roads of Dakota had disappeared behind me, swallowed whole by the immense void. My car was nothing more than a speck, a mere dot in the vast emptiness stretching out below. I reached out. I tried to shout, to do something, anything to stop it. But my voice was swallowed by the endless, soundless pull of the force around me. And then, the whispers came again. It's already too late. I couldn't tell if the voice was in my head or if it was coming from the void itself. But it was unmistakable, its presence sinking into my bones like ice. The voice wasn't just a warning anymore, it was a certainty. I was a part of this. I was already becoming one of them. The figures, the shadows, they were drawing closer now. They had shape, they had form, but not one of them was human. Some were amorphous, like smoke, shifting through the air. Others were twisted, with features so contorted I couldn't bear to look at them for long. I felt something brush against my arm. The chill was instant, freezing me in place, spreading out my skin like frost. No. I struggled. My body screamed at me to break free, to fight back. But it was too late. With a final, deafening pulse, the force pulled me faster, and I was falling through the blackness, through the light, through everything. I couldn't see the ground. I couldn't see the sky. I couldn't see anything. It was as if I had become part of the nothingness itself, lost in a world where there was no up, no down, no sense of time, no sense of reality. "It will take you too." The voice echoed again, clearer now, but this time it wasn't just a warning. It was a promise. And as I was pulled deeper into the abyss, I realized with a sickening certainty that I had crossed some line, some point of no return. I had become just another one of the lost. Another ghost, another mark in the endless stretch of road that would never be found again. The diner, the car, the light, the voices. They would all be forgotten, just like me. I woke up to nothing. There was no sound, no air, no sensation of time, no sense of the world as I knew it. It was as if I had been pulled out of reality itself and deposited somewhere else. At first, I couldn't tell if I was awake or still trapped in a dream. The sensation of weightlessness overwhelmed me, and for a moment, I wondered if I was floating, suspended in the middle of space. My limbs felt detached, light as air, and every movement seemed exaggerated, unsteady. I tried to blink, but there was no shift in my vision. Where am I? It wasn't just the absence of sound that unnerved me, it was the absence of everything. The world I knew, the world with its familiar shapes, sounds, and objects, was gone. In its place was an endless, blinding brightness that filled every corner of my vision. It wasn't white. It wasn't yellow or any color I recognized. It was pure, almost liquid, pulsating with an eerie luminescence. The light didn't just surround me, it engulfed me, pouring into my mind as if it were somehow part of my own consciousness. I reached out instinctively, my fingers splayed wide, but I found nothing to grasp. There was no texture to the space, no point of reference, only this unnatural, all-consuming brightness. I couldn't tell if I was moving or standing still. Was I still breathing? Was I even alive? I couldn't answer, because the idea of breathing, of air, seemed irrelevant in this place. Nothing made sense here. I tried to focus, to make sense of the disorienting sensation of weightlessness, but my mind swirled with confusion and panic began to creep in. Had the light taken me somewhere beyond my understanding? Was I dead? Was this some kind of purgatory, a limbo I couldn't escape? Suddenly, my body jerked forward as if pulled by an invisible string. It wasn't painful. There was no force to it, no strain. It just happened. I didn't move of my own accord, but the pull was unmistakable, and it seemed to be drawing me deeper into the blinding light. No. No, please. Let me go. The thought barely had time to form when I felt something shift around me, a faint ripple in the light. It was as though the space itself had stretched and reshaped, and I was now somewhere else. I couldn't comprehend what I was seeing. There were no shapes, no discernible figures, just endless illumination that seemed to distort and bend in ways that didn't obey the laws of nature. I wanted to scream, but I didn't have the strength. My throat was dry, and the air, if it could even be called air, was thick and insubstantial. The light wasn't just a physical presence, it seemed to have a weight to it, like it was pressing down on me, trying to invade my thoughts. As my mind scrambled for an explanation, a wave of dizziness swept over me. The air, or whatever it was, shifted again, the pressure building until I thought I might collapse under its weight. My thoughts began to fragment, slipping through my fingers like sand. I couldn't think straight. I couldn't even tell if I was still myself. Where am I? What is this place? The light was all I could see. It surrounded me in every direction, and it was as if it were alive, a living, breathing entity that knew me. I felt it pulsating, not in a way that was natural, but in a rhythm that seemed to synchronize with my heartbeat. It was like the light and I were connected somehow. It wasn't just the absence of reality that was frightening, it was the feeling of being watched. I tried to turn, to look behind me, but there was no behind. There was only the endless, blinding expanse of this alien space. And then I felt it, a presence. It wasn't in front of me, or beside me, but within the light itself. It wasn't an object, not even a shape. It was something beyond that, something that reached out from the very light, brushing against the edges of my thoughts like a whisper. "You're here now," it seemed to say. "You are part of the light." I froze. The thought didn't come from my own mind, it was like an intrusion, a foreign presence trying to force its way into my consciousness. But I couldn't reject it. I couldn't fight it. There was no way to push it away. "I don't want to be here." My mind screamed it, but the space around me didn't react. The presence didn't react. The light didn't react. It simply was. And in that moment, I understood that I had no control here. I was no longer a part of the world I knew. I had crossed into something else, something beyond comprehension, beyond reason. And I was being absorbed into it. With every passing second, I felt myself dissolving, not physically, but mentally. The sharp edges of my identity, my memories, my very existence, were blurring, slipping away. It was like I was being merged into the light, becoming one with it. I wasn't sure if I was still me, or if I had ever been. The presence seemed to notice my fear, and it welcomed it. There was no kindness, no malice, just an understanding that I was insignificant here. I had become nothing. I wasn't alone. At first, I thought I was imagining it. My senses, already stretched thin by the oppressive light and weightless air, were no longer reliable. Every second felt like an eternity, but in that timeless space, something stirred. It was like a fleeting shadow across the corner of my vision, nothing solid, just glimpses of something else, something other. I blinked. Once, twice. The first fragment was the hardest to process. A face, hollow eyes, gaunt cheeks, lips stretched in a silent scream. The image flickered, then vanished into the blinding glow like it was never there. Was it real? The voice inside my head, cold and alien, had quieted for a moment. My thoughts were my own again, but only for a brief instant. I felt a desperate need to focus, to hold on to what was slipping away, and as I did, I saw more. Another face. A man, disheveled, his hair matted with sweat. His mouth opened, but no sound came. His eyes were wide with terror, his body jerking in strange spasms as though caught in a horrible dance. He was reaching for something, someone, perhaps, but before I could follow his gaze, his form flickered like a broken projection, his silhouette torn apart by the light. I gasped, or at least I thought I did. But even as the strange vision faded, I couldn't shake the overwhelming certainty that I was not alone in this endless void. There were others, fragments of them, scattered through the light like pieces of a shattered mirror. Some of them were frantic, twisting and writhing in silent screams, but others were strangely calm. One figure stood perfectly still in the center of the light, as though unaffected by the chaos around them. Their face was serene, peaceful even, with eyes closed as if in deep contemplation. They exuded a sense of acceptance, as if they had embraced whatever fate had brought them here. They didn't fight, didn't scream, didn't even seem aware of me. They simply existed in the light, like a distant star that had burned out long ago, yet still flickering faintly in the distance. Another flash. A woman, sitting on the ground, her arms wrapped around her knees. She was staring straight ahead, her expression vacant. Her lips moved, but no words came. She rocked slowly, back and forth, as if trying to comfort herself, her body shaking with a silent sob that I couldn't hear. Are they like me? I thought, feeling a strange coldness crawl down my spine. There was no way to tell. The space was too vast, too unfamiliar. I couldn't reach out to them, couldn't ask them what had happened to us. I couldn't even tell if they could see me. Each vision was fleeting, blurring together before I could process them. Faces flickered in and out like old photographs caught in a faulty projector. Some appeared desperate, clawing at the air, mouths open in screams that I couldn't hear, while others seemed utterly detached, as if they had already succumbed to the endless light, their humanity eroded by whatever had taken us. I wanted to scream, to call out to them, to demand answers, but the emptiness swallowed my voice before it could even leave my throat. It was like trying to speak underwater, every word muffled by the sheer weight of the light pressing down on me. I felt it again, the presence. It was subtle, barely perceptible, but it was there. A pulse, a shiver running through the very air around me. The light seemed to hum with life, as if it were feeding off our fear, our confusion. It knew I was here. It knew I was struggling. But it didn't care. The presence was indifferent, detached. And then the visions came faster. Flashes of movement, faces, some still, some frantic. A man in a suit, his hands pressed against his chest as if holding something precious, his face frozen in horror. A child, tiny, her hands reaching up towards something just out of reach. A woman with long hair, tangled and wild, her eyes locked in a silent scream as she vanished into the light, her form dissolving into nothingness like smoke caught in a gust of wind. Where are they going? I wondered. The answer never came. The light shifted again, its brilliance so intense it burned into my retinas, and the faces vanished as quickly as they had appeared, leaving only emptiness in their wake. But the feeling remained. The presence. The sensation that I was not alone in this void, that whatever had brought us here, it was still watching. Still waiting. For what? The earth thickened once more, as if answering my unspoken question. A weight, heavier than before, pressed against my chest. I felt it pulling at me, trying to unravel me, trying to pull me into the light. And deep down, I knew. I wasn't meant to survive this. None of us were. I felt it before I heard it. The presence. It was no longer just a distant, detached sensation. It was close, pressing in from every direction, tightening around me until I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. It was as if the light itself had become alive, its edges closing in like the walls of a cage. I tried to move anything, to break free of the stillness, but my limbs remained unresponsive, frozen in place as if the air itself had thickened into something solid, something heavy. I could no longer tell if I was moving or simply being held in place by an invisible force. And then it came. Not a sound, not a voice, but something more. A sensation, a pressure against my mind, like the brush of fingers against the edge of my consciousness. It was as if the very light was speaking to me, not in words, but in a way that bypassed thought entirely, reaching directly into the core of my being. You are here, it seemed to say. You are part of the collection now. My skin prickled with a coldness that sank deeper than the air itself, deeper than my very bones. the presence was not benign. It was watching, aware of me, aware of my every thought, my every breath. I tried to reject it, to force it away, but it wasn't something that could be resisted. Who are you? I thought, though I knew the question was futile. There was no point in speaking here. Words had no power. The response came anyway, not as a voice, but as an overwhelming force in my mind, a wave of comprehension that crashed over me like a tide. It wasn't an answer, it was a statement. The Collector. I recoiled. The name echoed through my thoughts, reverberating like an unspoken truth. The Collector. A presence without form, without face, a thing that existed only in the space between everything, in the cracks of the universe where light and shadow bled together. What do you want? My mind screamed the question, but it was only a ripple in the stillness. The response was subtle, a shift in the light. A flicker in my vision, like the twisting of a figure just beyond the reach of my understanding. Purpose is beyond you, the presence whispered, not in words, but in meaning. Purpose is not for you to know. There was a heaviness to that statement, as if it were the culmination of something ancient, something beyond comprehension. A shiver ran through me, but it wasn't fear alone, it was recognition. Like I was seeing the truth of it, buried deep in my mind, and for the first time, I understood that this was not random. It's not random, the presence seemed to confirm, as though reading my thoughts. Nothing here is. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run, to escape, but I couldn't move. The light held me like a vice, and with each passing second, I felt myself sinking deeper into its depths. I was being pulled into something I could not understand, into something that was never meant for me to comprehend. The Collector wasn't interested in me, not as an individual. It was after something else. You are part of the collection, it repeated, the words thick with inevitability. You will become a part of the whole. I tried to focus, tried to make sense of what that meant. But the more I thought about it, the more my mind felt like it was being torn apart. There were no answers here, no clarity. Just an endless, relentless force that swallowed everything in its path. And then, in the corner of my mind, I caught something, an image. It was brief, fleeting, but it was there, a field of lights, scattered across an endless horizon, each one holding something, or someone, inside. Figures, faces, indistinct and barely visible, all bound to the same fate. I could see them now, the others. We were all here. All of us. Collected. What happens to us? I thought, my mind racing to understand, to fight back. The answer came, soft but chilling. You will be absorbed into the light. Your essence will be woven into the whole. I didn't fully understand what it meant, but I could feel it now, the weight of it. The truth of it. We weren't just being taken. We were being consumed, our very beings transformed, becoming part of something incomprehensible, something vast and all-encompassing. I tried to scream again, but it was useless. My voice was lost in the overwhelming presence, swallowed by the light. It's too late, the Collector whispered. You belong to us now. And as the words sank into my mind, I knew they were true. The moment I had been pulled into this place, the moment the light had claimed me, it had already begun. There was no escape. No turning back. I was part of the collection. And I was nothing now. Just another piece in the puzzle. I had been swallowed whole. For what felt like an eternity, I was nothing but a passenger in my own mind, drifting aimlessly through the blinding light. The Collector had claimed me, consumed me, and yet a fragment of my mind still fought. I don't know why I resisted. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the last shred of my humanity fighting against an incomprehensible force that sought to erase it. But I could feel it deep inside, like a spark, small but defiant, burning away the suffocating weight of the light. No, I thought. Not like this. I pushed back. I willed my body to move, my hands to grip, my legs to run. There was no physical form to fight against, no walls to slam into. But the will was there, and I held onto it with everything I had. I wasn't going to be absorbed without a fight. The light flickered. A shudder ran through the space around me, as though something had stirred, something ancient, something that wasn't pleased with my defiance. It was subtle at first, just a quiver in the brilliance of the light, like a breath held too long. But then it shifted. The air around me thickened. My heart pounded, the sound filling my ears, drowning out everything else. The light trembled, like it was responding to me, reacting to my refusal to succumb. A violent, chaotic pulse raced through the space, distorting everything. The faces. The others, flickering like broken images in a shattered mirror, began to move. It was like I had triggered something, some hidden mechanism that had kept us all suspended in this prison. The flickering faces twisted and contorted, their bodies jerking in violent spasms, their screams, silent but felt, pressing on me from all directions. They reached out, their hands clawing through the light as if trying to escape, trying to grab hold of something, anything to break free. But no matter how much they struggled, no matter how much I did, the light pushed back harder. I felt a sharp pain in my chest, like the very air around me was pressing in, squeezing me from all sides. The weightlessness I had once felt turned into something far worse, like being pinned to the ground by an invisible force, my limbs buckling under the pressure. No, no, no! I screamed in my mind, but my voice was still gone, trapped inside my own head. The light shuddered again. Something cracked, something snapped. The space around me began to distort in ways I couldn't comprehend. It was like the walls of reality were fracturing, breaking apart at the seams. The air warped, swirling around me, pulling apart in ragged tears. I could see jagged slivers of something dark, like voids opening up in the light itself. The figures, the ones trapped with me, screamed. This time, I could feel it. The force of their anguish vibrated through the space, like waves crashing against a shore. It was raw, violent, and unrestrained. Their faces morphed in agony, stretching and contorting as though they were trying to claw their way out of whatever this was. This is wrong, I realized. The air itself felt wrong. The light felt wrong. The presence that had once felt so indifferent now felt agitated. You shouldn't have done that, the collector's voice whispered, but it was different this time. It wasn't the calm, calculating tone from before. Now, it was angry, raging. You were not meant to resist. But I didn't care. I couldn't stop now. The fear, the confusion, the endless, gnawing terror, they were all consuming me, yes, but they were also pushing me forward. If this was the end, if this was the fate that awaited me, I would make it count. I would not go quietly. I will not be your prisoner. The light flashed in response, blinding, searing. It burned through my thoughts, cutting into my mind like a blade. The world around me fractured. Time stretched, bending in impossible angles, snapping back again in cruel jolts. I felt myself falling, no, being ripped through layers of light and darkness, crashing through walls of reality that weren't meant to be touched. The space around me began to tear. Flickering images flashed by, places, faces, people, like snapshots of moments that never belonged to me. The figures, the other trapped souls, were disintegrating, dissolving into the light, leaving nothing behind but fragments of their former selves. But I refused. I clenched my fists, focused on the burning thought that had driven me all along. I will not become part of this. And then it happened. A crack, louder than anything I had ever heard, split through the void. The light fractured. It was like breaking glass, the sound reverberating through me, sending shockwaves of pain into my very core. For a brief moment, I saw it, beyond the light. A vast, dark nothingness, an endless expanse of shadow, and in the distance, a cold, unfeeling presence that had always been there, watching. But the crack didn't close. Instead, the rift grew wider, and I felt myself being pulled. Not by the light, not by the collector, but by something else, something that was trying to reach me, trying to claim me before the fracture sealed completely. But this time, I didn't go quietly. The crack widened, splitting the very fabric of the light itself. I felt myself being pulled again, but this time it wasn't the collector's force. No, it was something else. Something different. Something that wasn't bound by the rules of this place. The cold, dark nothingness beyond the fracture tugged at me, promising an end to this nightmare. I could feel the force waning, the light flickering, faltering in a way I'd never seen before. It was as though the very space around me had been shaken loose, like the foundation of the world was beginning to crumble. My body felt weightless, drifting, no, falling. For the first time since I had been brought here, I felt the sensation of motion. A tug, then a pull, and suddenly, I was no longer suspended. I was plummeting. I fell through the fracture, the dark void widening beneath me, swallowing me whole. My mind raced, panic clawing at my chest as I tried to make sense of it all. Was this escape? Was I finally breaking free? Or was this the final trick, the last illusion before I was consumed entirely? But the force that had been holding me began to lose its grip. It was like the air was thinning, the oppressive weight around me lightening with every second. For a brief, terrifying moment, I thought I might be free. And then, in an instant, I hit the ground. The impact was sharp, too sharp. My body slammed into something hard, and I gasped, the air rushing from my lungs as I was knocked senseless. My head spun, my vision blurred. I couldn't tell if the ground beneath me was real or if I had merely landed in some twisted part of this nightmare. But as I lay there, struggling to breathe, the silence enveloped me. It wasn't the suffocating stillness of the light. It was something else, something eerily familiar. I slowly opened my eyes. I was on the road. The familiar, cracked pavement stretched out before me, stretching toward the endless plains. The world was vast, empty, and silent. But this time, it wasn't the eerie, unnatural quiet of the light, it was the sound of the wind whispering across the barren landscape. The world felt real. I was back. I pushed myself up, my body aching, bruised from the fall, but still alive. My hands scraped against the ground as I fought to get to my feet. I looked around, still in disbelief. Was I dreaming? Had I really fallen back to the earth, or was I stuck in another layer of this nightmare, another trick played on me by the collector? The horizon stretched endlessly before me. The night sky was vast, dark, and filled with stars. The moon hung low, casting a pale light across the plains, its cold glow stark against the shadowed earth. There were no lights in the sky, no strange phenomenon, nothing except the silence. Except I froze. My car. My own car. There it was, sitting on the side of the road, just as I had left it. But something was wrong. Something about it felt off. The engine was cold, the headlights dim. The doors were ajar, as if someone had been there, but left in a hurry. I took a cautious step toward it, my heart pounding, but something in the back of my mind screamed at me to be careful, to not get too close. But I had to know. I reached for the door, my hand trembling. I pulled it open slowly. Inside, empty. No sign of the force that had taken me, no sign of the presence that had hovered over me for so long. It was just my car. My own. The seat was cold, untouched. I stepped inside, my hands fumbling to start the engine. It roared to life with a cough, and I exhaled, barely aware of the tightness in my chest. But as the engine purred, something shifted. A shadow. A faint whisper in the wind. The sky. The sky, it was moving. My pulse quickened. The light. It wasn't gone. It had followed me. Not directly, not in the way I had seen before, but it was there, shifting, flickering at the edge of my vision. The air around me felt wrong again. I slammed the car into drive and sped away, the tires kicking up dirt as I raced down the road. The plain stretched out before me like an endless sea of nothing, but I didn't care. I didn't look back. Whatever this place was, whatever force had dragged me into its clutches, it wasn't done with me yet. But I would not go back. Not without a fight. I woke with a start, gasping for air as though I had been drowning. My eyes snapped open to a world that seemed wrong. The familiar, barren landscape of South Dakota had returned, but something felt different. The road was no longer the same. My head throbbed, a dull ache that pulsed with every heartbeat. The crash had come out of nowhere. 1 second, I had been speeding down the highway, desperate to escape the ever-watchful light, and the next, impact. The car had soared violently, tumbling, crashing into the dirt and rock beside the road. The world had blurred around me as the seatbelt dug into my chest, and then everything had gone black. Now, here I was, lying half-conscious, the taste of blood on my lips and the smell of gasoline in the air. I tried to sit up, but pain shot through my body, and I hissed, clutching the side of the car for support. My hands were shaking as I wiped the blood from my forehead, and my legs felt like rubber. The world spun as I glanced around, trying to make sense of where I was. I wasn't on the highway anymore. I was miles away. The crash had thrown me far from the diner. How had I gotten here? The distance was impossible to explain. The trees on either side of the road were more dense than they had been earlier. The plains had given way to a rougher, more jagged terrain. It was as if the world itself had shifted. I forced myself to focus on my surroundings, my mind still fuzzy from the crash. There were wrecked cars everywhere, scattered haphazardly along the road, their twisted forms almost indistinguishable from one another. Some were abandoned with their doors hanging open, others were overturned, their wheels spinning uselessly in the air. I blinked, trying to clear the fog from my mind, and the reality of the scene hit me. This wasn't just a crash. These cars, these abandoned vehicles, were exactly like the ones I had seen earlier, back on that same highway. The same eerie stillness, the same unsettling emptiness. I pushed myself out of the wrecked car, stumbling onto the gravel. The world around me felt warped, like the space itself was bending, shifting. The air was thick with a heaviness I couldn't explain, and I felt a constant pressure in my chest, as if something was watching, waiting. I shook my head, trying to clear the thoughts, but they lingered, unwelcome. I couldn't stay here. I needed to move. But my legs felt like they were made of stone, each step dragging me forward with immense effort. I forced myself to take a few slow, tentative steps down the road, my eyes scanning the wreckage. The cars, the debris, the broken glass, it all felt so familiar, as though this place had already been burned into my memory. Was it a nightmare? A hallucination? The air grew heavier the farther I moved, and the sound of my footsteps felt muffled, like I was walking underwater. I stopped to look back at the car, but the wreckage of the vehicles around me seemed to twist into something darker, more ominous. I wasn't alone. There was something here. Something just out of my sight. I could feel it, a presence, subtle but undeniable. The wind picked up, and a shadow shifted in my peripheral vision. I spun around, my breath quickening. Nothing. But I wasn't alone. The pressure in the air thickened, and I knew, in my gut, that I wasn't simply lost on some remote stretch of highway. I was somewhere else, somewhere I wasn't supposed to be. My heart pounded in my chest as I stumbled through the wreckage, trying to make sense of the chaotic scene around me. The sun, now a harsh midday glow, cast long shadows across the landscape, but something felt off. The road, the red cars, even the air, I could feel the weight of time itself stretching in unnatural ways. It felt wrong. I walked past a pile of broken glass and metal, my mind struggling to piece together what had happened. The crash, the darkness, the light, it all blurred together. Nothing made sense. How had I gotten here? How much time had passed since I had been taken? I needed answers. I needed to understand what was happening, or at least, I needed some kind of proof that I wasn't losing my mind. My hands still shook, the adrenaline in my system starting to wear off, leaving me with a terrible fatigue. My eyes darted across the wreckage, and something caught my attention. A weathered newspaper, half buried under a broken fender. I reached down, my fingers brushing against the crinkled paper, pulling it free with a mix of curiosity and dread. The date on the front page sent a chill through me. July 13th, 2024. But the last time I had checked, it had been midnight, only a few hours ago, maybe. It was impossible. The reality didn't fit. I had been gone for days, yet it felt like I had only slipped into unconsciousness for a few minutes. The headline screamed at me. Unexplained disappearances in South Dakota, local authorities baffled. I blinked, my stomach sinking. The story was filled with vague details, listing several disappearances across the state, drivers gone without a trace, vehicles left abandoned on desolate roads. I scanned the article, each word more unsettling than the last. The police had no explanation. Witnesses reported seeing strange lights, strange phenomena, much like the ones I had encountered. But they were already weeks into the investigation, and still, no answers. No clues. Just more questions. I let the paper fall from my hands, my mind reeling. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I had been gone for days. How was that possible? Time had warped. It wasn't just my memory that was fractured. It was as if the very fabric of time itself had been twisted into something unnatural. I looked around, half expecting to see something emerge from the shadows. The wreckage, the silent cars, the ghostly remains of abandoned lives, all of it felt like a warning. It couldn't be a coincidence. I was not the first. I turned away from the wreckage, the newspaper still clutched in my hand, and moved forward. I needed to get out of here. I couldn't let myself think too much about the time that had slipped away, or what might have happened in those missing days. If I did, I feared I might lose my grip on reality completely. But as I walked, a thought nagged at me, one I couldn't shake. What if I was still trapped in whatever this place was? What if all of this was just another layer of the nightmare? As I trudged forward, the weight of the newspaper in my hands felt heavier with every step. My mind raced, trying to make sense of the impossible. I had to get away from this place, but there was no escape. No matter how far I walked, it felt as if the land itself had been marked by whatever had taken me. And then, I saw it. At first, it was a subtle shift, a slight distortion in the ground, like a ripple in a still pond. But the closer I got, the clearer it became. The earth was scarred. It wasn't natural. A deep, blackened burn mark stretched across the earth, as if something searingly hot had scorched the land, leaving a trail of destruction in its wake. The shape was too perfect, too deliberate, like a mark left by something that wasn't bound by the laws of nature. It didn't just burn the grass and earth, it had seeped into the soil itself, leaving a dark, unnatural stain. I knelt beside it, my fingers brushing the ground. The earth was cool to the touch, but there was something about it that didn't feel right, something that made my skin crawl. The burn didn't just seem to mar the land, it had changed it. As if the very fabric of the world had been altered by whatever force had passed through here. I pulled my hand back, shaking. But that wasn't the only thing. I glanced around, scanning the area for any other signs. As I did, I saw it again, another scorch mark. This one was larger, spreading out in jagged lines, the earth cracked beneath it like some giant had walked through, tearing the land apart. The deeper depressions weren't just from the burn. There were strange indentations, like something heavy had pressed down on the soil, leaving behind an imprint that didn't belong. And the worst part? The direction. The marks seemed to be leading towards something. Toward the center of the land. Toward me. I stood up, my legs shaking, and backed away slowly. The oppressive weight of the land seemed to press in on me from all sides. Whatever had caused this, whatever had left these marks, was still nearby. The feeling of being watched was suffocating, the air thick with something I couldn't name. I turned to keep walking, to keep moving, but the land felt alive now, alive with something sinister, something that wasn't finished with me. The closer I looked at the marks, the more they seemed to pulse, faintly, as if they were breathing, as if they were waiting for something. I needed to get out of here. I couldn't stop, couldn't let myself linger. But even as I took a few steps back toward the road, I felt the ground tremble beneath me. I paused, my heart racing, my eyes scanning the horizon. The wind picked up, blowing through the dry grass with a mournful wail. And then, there it was. A faint glow, distant, but unmistakable. The light. It was back. I could feel the glow in the distance now, a distant hum in the air, like the pulse of a heartbeat. It was moving closer, casting a sickly light across the land, and something deep inside me screamed that I needed to run. But I couldn't, not yet. I kept walking, my footsteps heavy and slow, my mind barely keeping together. The survivors. I had to find them. They were out here, somewhere. Maybe they knew something, anything that could explain this madness that had swallowed me whole. The wreckage of the cars had grown thicker. Some were overturned, others had been abandoned for so long that nature had begun to reclaim them. But there was a strange sort of order to the chaos. Each vehicle was aligned as though someone had arranged them this way, placed them just so in the vast emptiness. And then I saw them. A group of people. They were gathered near a large, rusted truck, their faces gaunt and hollow-eyed, their clothing ragged, torn by time and the elements. They were all older than me, maybe by a decade or more, and their eyes told the same story: loss, confusion, and something darker that lingered just beneath the surface. They didn't seem surprised to see me. In fact, they barely looked up as I approached. It was as if I wasn't the first to wander into their strange little camp, drawn by the same terrifying pull that had brought them here. One of them, a man with a long, scruffy beard, finally met my gaze. His eyes were a dull, faded blue, empty of emotion, but also alive with a kind of haunted awareness. Another one, he muttered, his voice raw and hoarse. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breathing. What is this? What's happening here? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked down at his hands, his fingers twitching like they had a mind of their own. When he spoke again, his words were slow, as if he were choosing them carefully, as if he didn't want to say too much, yet couldn't stop himself. It's the light, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. It takes you, makes you forget time. You think it's only been minutes, but it's days, or weeks. He looked over at the others, and I followed his gaze. They were all staring into space, lost in their own worlds, their eyes vacant, like they'd been chewed up and spit out by something they couldn't fully understand. Another woman, her hair matted and tangled, spoke up from the edge of the group. We tried to leave, we tried to run. But the land, it keeps pulling us back. I saw it. Her voice quivered, as if the memory was too fresh, too raw. It moves, like it's alive. And when you're close, you know it's watching you. But you can't get away. A young man, no older than 20, leaned forward with a frantic look in his eyes. His hands shook as he clutched a bottle of water. I saw people, you know? People like me. But they were changed. And they knew things. Things that we don't understand. They were us. But not anymore. Like they had been taken. He shook his head, his lips trembling. It's like we're just fragments now. Pieces of something that isn't real. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. I had to push back the terror rising in my chest. These people, they were here, just like me. They'd been taken, brought back, or worse, never truly left. What happened to the others? I asked, voice cracking. The man with the beard shook his head slowly. I don't know. Some disappeared. Some stayed. Some, he trailed off, his eyes darkening. We all heard the whispers. In our heads. Telling us we were nothing. That we weren't supposed to be here. But we keep coming back. Like we're drawn to it. A tense silence fell over the group, and for the first time, I noticed how each of them flinched, as if some invisible weight was bearing down on them. I wanted to ask more. I needed answers. But I could see it in their faces, they didn't have any more answers than I did. They were lost, just like me, trapped in this bizarre loop of fear and confusion. And then I heard it, the faint hum of the light, growing louder. The others stiffened, their eyes snapping to the horizon. The same fear I felt was mirrored in their faces. It's coming, the man whispered. It always comes. I turned to face the direction they were looking, dread crawling up my throat. The light was growing brighter, pulling at my very soul. I couldn't escape it. It was here, now, and it was pulling us back, all of us, into the same suffocating nightmare. The light was there. Again. A faint glow on the horizon, growing larger with each passing second, like the eye of some unseen storm, its pull undeniable and terrifying. My heart pounded as the hum of the light vibrated in my chest, low and resonant, like a steady beat that matched the rhythm of my own panic. The others stiffened around me, their faces pale, their bodies taut with the same tension that coiled in my gut. It was happening again. I wanted to scream, to run, to flee as fast as my legs would carry me. But I couldn't. It was like the very air had changed. The wind felt heavier, as though it was pulling me toward the light. I could feel its gravity, a slow, insidious force that seemed to stretch across the land, reaching out to touch every fiber of my being. The others didn't move at first. They just stood there, staring at the glow. And then, one by one, they began to shuffle forward. It wasn't voluntary. I could see it in their eyes. They were walking of their own accord. It was as if the light had seized control of their bodies, forcing them to move despite their will. And I felt it, too. The tug. The whispering, invisible hands pulling at my limbs, urging me forward towards the glowing horizon. I wanted to resist. I tried to resist. But every step I took away from the light felt heavier, like the land itself was fighting against me. I couldn't outrun it. The pull was too strong. The man with the scruffy beard was the first to speak, his voice hoarse and strained, like he was talking through a fog. It's happening again, he murmured, his words barely audible over the hum of the light. We're being drawn back. To it. A young woman, her eyes wide and frantic, looked around at the others. We need to stop. We need to, but her voice faltered, cut off by an invisible force that yanked her forward. Her feet slid in the dirt as she was pulled, unwilling, toward the horizon. I tried to reach for her, to pull her back, but my own body was betraying me. My feet moved against my will, step by step, each one bringing me closer to the light. My legs felt like they were made of lead, my chest tight with panic, but there was nothing I could do to stop it. I looked around desperately, my mind racing for some explanation, some way to break free of this force. But I knew, deep down, there was no escaping it. It was in the air, in the earth, in the very fabric of this place. The light was an anchor, and we were its prey. As we moved closer, the light began to take shape, faint at first, but then clearer, as if it were pulling us into some kind of strange, shifting vortex. The air grew heavier, thick with static. My skin prickled, the hairs on my neck standing on end. The world around me seemed to warp and distort as we moved toward it. The others were ahead of me now, their faces expressionless, almost zombie-like. They were no longer fighting. They were no longer themselves. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tear myself away, to run back into the wreckage of the cars, to hide from whatever this was. But the closer I got, the more the light filled my vision, a blinding, otherworldly glow that seemed to consume everything. I couldn't breathe. The air felt like it was being sucked away from me, replaced with something wrong. The pull was too strong now. It was no longer just in my body, it was in my mind, in my very thoughts, whispering, urging me forward. I had no choice but to keep moving. And then, from the edge of my vision, I saw something. A figure. A shape standing at the center of the light. It was barely a silhouette, but I could feel it, watching. I couldn't tell if it was human or something else entirely. But I knew one thing, it was waiting for me. The pull was overwhelming. My body, my mind, every part of me screamed to stop, to turn around and run, but I couldn't. Step by step, my legs moved in sync with the others, and the world around me grew blurry, distorted, until the only thing left in my vision was the light. The light that had drawn us all in, and now it felt like there was nowhere left to hide. I stumbled forward, my breath shallow and ragged as the landscape began to shift around me. The sound of my footsteps was muted, swallowed by the thick silence that hung in the air, heavy like smoke. The world seemed smaller now, as if the vast plains had contracted to a point where there was only the light, the cars, and us. We were almost there. I could see them now. The other cars, all lined up in a perfect row, their headlights dim and cold. The vehicles were arranged in an almost unnatural symmetry, as though they had been carefully placed, each one aligned precisely with the others, their metal bodies gleaming under the eerie glow. And in front of them stood their drivers, motionless, their faces turned toward the light, their bodies rigid with an unsettling precision. There were no screams, no sounds of struggle. They were all just waiting. Standing there, frozen, like mannequins in a twisted display. But I knew they hadn't chosen to be here. No one chose this. We had all been brought here. I stopped a few feet away, my heart pounding in my chest. I wanted to move closer, to shake them, to wake them from whatever stupor they were trapped in. But I knew I couldn't. They weren't here. Not anymore. Their eyes were wide open, but there was nothing behind them, no recognition, no life, just a hollow emptiness that mirrored the vastness of the sky above us. They were empty. I reached out, my fingers trembling, but before I could make contact, I felt the pull again. It was stronger now, an invisible force tugging at me, urging me forward, urging me to join them. But I couldn't. Not like this. Stop, I whispered, though the word felt too small, too fragile in this place. Please, stop this. But the others didn't hear me. They couldn't. They were too far gone. And then, the shape in the center of the light moved. It wasn't human, at least, not in the way I understood human form. It was like a distortion, a black silhouette that shifted and morphed as if it were a shadow cast by something far beyond our comprehension. I could feel it, even from this distance, the weight of its presence pressing down on me. The air grew colder, denser, as though the space itself were bending. It was watching us. Watching me. My heart raced, a cold sweat breaking out on my skin. This was it. The moment I had feared, the moment everything had been building toward. I couldn't escape. I couldn't outrun this. The figure's form shimmered, and suddenly, the world around me stopped. Time slowed, stretched thin, until it felt like every moment was being drawn out, pulled apart. And in that frozen instant, I understood. This wasn't just a light. It wasn't just some strange phenomenon in the sky. It was something else. Something ancient. Something that existed outside of time, outside of space. The figure spoke, though its voice wasn't audible. It was inside my mind, flooding my consciousness with a truth too vast to comprehend. You are all fragments, it whispered, its presence echoing in my thoughts. You are memories, scattered across the plains, waiting to be reclaimed. The words hit me like a blow to the chest, sending a sharp pain through my skull. My vision flickered, the scene before me warping as the truth settled in. I wasn't just here because of chance. I wasn't here because of some accident or unexplained event. I was chosen. We were all chosen. The light, it wasn't just drawing us in. It was taking us. Taking our essence, our very souls, and scattering them across the endless reaches of time and space. We were trapped in an eternal cycle of being drawn in, only to be taken and left behind. Our bodies were mere vessels, our memories the only things that remained. The figure moved again, its form now clearer, more defined, a grotesque amalgamation of light and shadow. And then, for the first time, I felt its voice truly enter me. This is your purpose. You are not to escape. You are not to fight. You are to be gathered. And when you are all here, when you have all returned, the cycle will begin again. The realization crashed over me with overwhelming force. There was no escape. There would never be an escape. The others, the drivers, had already given in. They had accepted their fate, embraced their role in this endless loop of capture and release. And now, it was my turn. My body moved before I could stop it. Step by step, I walked toward the light, toward the others, toward the figure. I didn't want to go. I didn't want to join them, to lose myself in this horrible cycle. But there was no choice. I had already been taken. As I took the final step toward the light, a strange calm washed over me, as if the universe itself had exhaled and accepted me. The light, now overwhelming in its intensity, surrounded me completely, blinding every corner of my vision. And yet, instead of pain, there was a peculiar sense of clarity, an understanding that filled the space of my mind, flooding it with alien knowledge. It wasn't like any revelation I had ever experienced. It wasn't words or images, it was a raw, primal understanding of everything. My thoughts fractured, breaking apart under the weight of it all, each new truth slicing through me like a blade through soft flesh. The light is not of this world, I realized, or at least, not of any world I had ever known. It was part of something much larger, far more ancient, something that stretched beyond the stars, beyond the galaxies, beyond the very fabric of reality itself. It was a mechanism, a tool for harvesting, for gathering the essence of life, pulling beings from the fabric of time and space like crops from a field. The cars, the drivers, the strange and unearthly stillness, they were the harvest. We were being gathered, our memories, our consciousness, our very souls, stripped from us and stored in this inescapable loop. The figure I had seen earlier wasn't a creature, not in the way I had once understood creatures. It was the embodiment of this process, an agent, or perhaps something even more unfathomable, overseeing the cycle. I could feel it now. The pulse of the harvest. It was a cosmic event, one that spanned across time and space, its roots sunk deep into the fabric of existence. It was not bound by laws of physics or biology. It had no moral compass, no concept of good or evil. It was a force, pure and simple, drawing life from every corner of the universe, collecting memories, moments, experiences, as if they were crops to be reaped and stored for an unknown purpose. As the knowledge poured into my mind, I saw flashes of everything that had happened before, the disappearances, the strange glowing lights, the cars left behind, and the ones who had been taken before me. They were all part of it. The harvest wasn't limited to just one time or one place, it was ongoing, eternal. Each time a light appeared, another cycle began, and more souls were drawn into the web of this cosmic reaping. The eerie synchronization of the drivers standing under the light was not mere chance, it was a necessary part of the process. They were already shaped by the light. Their bodies, their minds, had been altered and twisted by it, their consciousnesses aligned with the harvest. And I could feel it now. A part of me was already becoming like them, joining the endless line of harvested souls. But there was more. My mind continued to unravel the truth in terrifying bursts of clarity. The light wasn't just harvesting life from one world, one dimension. It was collecting across realities, pulling beings from all possible timelines, all possible worlds. Every time someone disappeared under the glow, it wasn't just a person from this world, it was a piece of a larger whole, a fragment of something that existed beyond our comprehension. I could see them now, figures, shadows, flashes of alien life. They were scattered across the boundaries of the light, lost in the abyss. Some were in agony, their faces twisted in a silent scream. Others were calm, resigned. Some had even merged with the light itself, becoming part of it, consumed by it entirely. There were so many. Countless souls, each one flickering like a dying star, each one a memory lost to eternity. I wasn't just part of a physical collection. I was part of the very fabric of the light. My memories, my identity, they were nothing. I was nothing. Just another part of the cosmic machinery, a fleeting thought in a universe too vast to understand. In the distance, I saw the figure again, its form clearer now, more defined, as though the very essence of it was woven into the light itself. And then, the figure moved. Slowly. Methodically. It wasn't human, not by any stretch of the imagination. But it was there. Watching. It spoke again, but this time, its voice filled every inch of my being, as if it wasn't speaking to me directly, but to everything, to the very molecules of my body, the very atoms of my soul. You are part of this now, it intoned, its voice resonating with an unnatural harmony. You will be carried forward, through time and space, an endless cycle of remembrance and rebirth. You will be harvested, like all others, and you will become the harvesters. The light never ends. The cycle never ends. And neither will you. I tried to scream, but no sound came. I wanted to resist, to fight, to claw my way back into the world I once knew. But the light had consumed me. It had taken me, and now there was nothing left. The figure's presence loomed closer, its form blurring, merging with the light. And with one final pulse of realization, I understood. I was not meant to escape. I was not meant to survive. I was meant to be a part of the endless harvest, forever lost in the web of the light. Forever a fragment in a universe too vast, too cold, to ever be understood. And in that moment, as I stood there among the other lost souls, I realized that the cycle had begun again. The harvest was never over. The figure's presence intensified, filling the air with an oppressive weight, as though the very atmosphere was saturated with the gravity of its purpose. It was no longer just a shadow among the light, no longer just an entity watching from the void. It was now inside me, its essence penetrating every thought, every corner of my mind, pushing me toward a decision. The light flared, shifting and pulsing, as if responding to the figure's movements. It was as if everything around us was aware of the moment unfolding, like the world itself was holding its breath. There were no more distractions, no more sound or movement. All I could feel was the presence of the figure, towering over me, its gaze not just on me, but through me, piercing the core of my very existence. You are at a crossroads, the voice filled my head, both terrifying and indifferent, as though the figure were speaking from all around me, from deep within my own mind. It was a voice that carried an unrelenting weight, a cold certainty that it had seen everything, had lived through it all, and had no care for the lives it toyed with. You have seen the truth, it continued, its voice now a dark echo in my thoughts. You understand the purpose, the endless cycle. You are part of the harvest, a fragment to be collected. But now, you must choose. I felt a sudden, sharp pain in my chest, a cold fear that spiraled through me, freezing every nerve. I couldn't escape. I couldn't run. And yet, somehow, I was still being given a choice. I wasn't sure whether to be relieved or horrified. The light around me dimmed for a brief moment, as if it were waiting, as if giving me time to comprehend. But there was no comfort in this pause, no space for hope. The air grew thick, swirling with the oppressive silence of eternity. The figure took a step closer, and for the first time, I could feel its intent, like a pressure on my skin, a sensation that forced every hair on my body to stand on end. You may join us willingly, it offered, its tone a strange mixture of calm and menace. You will become part of the harvest, an eternal fragment of the light. Your consciousness will be preserved, scattered across the vastness of the cosmos, living forever in its infinite embrace. You will no longer fear, no longer question. You will simply be. I closed my eyes for a moment, the coldness of its words sinking in like ice. The idea of ceasing to struggle, of becoming part of this strange and incomprehensible force, was tempting. No more fear. No more pain. No more questions. Just being, forever. The thought was almost soothing, almost. But I knew in my very core that it wasn't freedom. It wasn't peace. It was surrender. To become part of this endless cycle, to join the others, would be to lose myself forever. There would be no return. No hope. Nothing. And yet, the figure's voice deepened, pressing into me, as if reading my thoughts. Or, it whispered, a dark promise in the silence, you can refuse. You can resist. You can fight. A shiver ran down my spine. The tone shifted, the pressure in the air growing unbearable. But know this, refusal will not bring freedom. Your resistance will not stop the harvest. It will only delay the inevitable. And in the delay, you will suffer. You will be torn apart, broken by time itself. You will endure eternal torment, trapped in a cycle of endless despair. You will become nothing but a shattered memory, lost in the endless void. The weight of its words hung heavy, each syllable reverberating like a death knell in the deepest corners of my mind. My chest tightened, breath caught in my throat. The choice was unbearable, either surrender to the light and become part of its eternal collection, or defy it and face unimaginable pain, a torment that would never end. I wanted to fight. I wanted to resist, to tear myself free from the light, to scream and claw my way back into the world of the living. But the truth was there, undeniable, there was no escape. I wasn't in control. The light had already claimed me, and no matter how hard I fought, I would only ever be part of the cycle. A choice. The ultimate irony. A choice between surrender and suffering, between joining the light or becoming lost in its shadow. And yet, I understood. The figure didn't need me to choose. It didn't need me to give in. It just wanted me to accept. The light flickered again, brighter now, urging me toward the figure. I could feel my mind unraveling, but in the depths of that unraveling, something else rose within me, a spark of defiance. Maybe I couldn't escape. Maybe I couldn't fight back against the cycle. But there was one thing I could do. I could refuse. I could choose to fight, not with my body, but with my mind. I could reject the light's offer, not because I thought I could win, but because I refused to surrender, to lose myself completely. The figure's form blurred for a moment, as if reacting to my resistance. I felt its rage, cold and infinite, ripple through the space around me. It was no longer patient. It was growing frustrated. The torment it had promised felt closer now, its dark tendrils wrapping around me, pulling tighter. But I stood my ground. I would not accept. Not yet. I took a step back, defiant. And for the briefest of moments, the light flickered, uncertain, as if the decision was not so final after all. The cycle could wait. The harvest could wait. But I would not yield. Not today. The presence, the figure, the force, the light itself, loomed over me, its weight heavy and suffocating. I could feel its impatience now, its frustration radiating from every flicker of the light, from every pulse that ran through the air like electricity. It wanted me to surrender, it wanted me to join the harvest. But I couldn't do it, not for myself, and not for the others. I glanced at the other drivers standing in eerie synchronization beneath the glow. They were still, their faces vacant, their eyes glazed over, as if their minds had already given in. They were lost, captured by the light, absorbed into its eternal cycle. But something within me screamed that they weren't beyond saving. Not yet. The figure's presence was drawing closer now, its form sharpening, a blur of motion just at the edge of my vision. The light flickered again, like a warning, as if it knew what I was about to do. You are resisting for nothing, the voice echoed in my mind, colder now. You cannot stop what is inevitable. You cannot protect them. There is no escape. But I wasn't listening to the figure anymore. I was thinking of the others, of the people who had been taken, who were still here, standing frozen under the light. They were just like me, caught in the web, drawn here against their will, victims of a force far beyond their comprehension. And they deserved a chance. I took a deep breath. My heart pounded in my chest as I felt the air around me grow heavier. The presence was so close now, I could almost feel it within my bones, like an invasive cold, creeping through every inch of me. But I didn't have time to think. I couldn't think. The choice was no longer about me. It was about everyone else. Listen to me. I shouted, the words breaking through the stillness like a crack of thunder, though my voice felt small in the vast emptiness of the light. But there was no answer, just a ringing silence. The others didn't react. They were beyond hearing, beyond understanding. I had to act fast. I glanced at the diner in the distance, a fleeting memory of refuge. It was still standing, still abandoned, but I knew I couldn't run back there. There was nowhere to run. The light had taken everything. But there was one thing I could do, distract it. I had no idea how. But instinct, desperation, and something deep within me pushed me forward. The light was too focused on me now. I could feel its attention seeping into my thoughts, drawing me in, breaking me down. But if I could create a disturbance, if I could draw its focus away from the others for even a moment, maybe they could escape. I couldn't wait. I couldn't hesitate. I bolted, running toward the group of frozen drivers. My steps were heavy, each one a battle against the weight of the air around me, each one an act of defiance against the force that tried to consume me. The light pulsed brighter, angry now, and I felt the figure's presence surge forward, reaching for me, demanding that I stop. But I didn't. I couldn't. Not anymore. I reached out to the nearest person, a man whose vacant eyes stared ahead, unmoving. His clothes were pristine, his hands relaxed by his sides as if he had simply stopped in the middle of a task. "Wake up!" I shouted, grabbing his shoulder and shaking him roughly. His body jerked under my touch, but his eyes didn't change. There was nothing behind them, just emptiness. But that was when I saw it, the smallest flicker of awareness. His fingers twitched. His eyelids fluttered. "Please," I whispered. "Please, wake up. You can still leave. You can still escape." The light above us flickered again, more radically now. I felt the figure's anger rising, its presence overwhelming. But I couldn't stop. I wouldn't stop. With everything I had left, I screamed again, "Everyone, run! Run now!" The chaos that followed felt like an eternity. I could see it, the light now vibrating, as though disturbed by the very act of defiance. The ground beneath me trembled. The cars around me shuddered. But the others began to move. One by one, they started to break free from the light's grip. At first, it was just small movements, hesitant and unsure, as if they were waking from a deep sleep. But soon they were all moving, stumbling away from the light's reach. Their faces were full of confusion, fear, and a desperate yearning to escape. I turned to run with them, to join them in their flight, but as I took my first step, I felt it, the cold, searing grip of the figure pulling at my mind, tightening, relentless. My legs faltered. The world around me blurred. The others had broken free. They were running. But I wasn't going anywhere. The figure's voice filled my thoughts, sharp and cruel. "You cannot save them. You cannot save yourself. You are mine." And in that moment, I knew what had to be done. The others had their chance now, their one moment of freedom. They were running, escaping. I had given them that. But I couldn't escape. I was too far gone. "No," I whispered, my voice breaking, but resolute. "I will not let you take them." I focused all my remaining strength into one last act of defiance. With a final scream, I fought, not with my body, but with my very mind, with my soul, against the endless pull of the light. For a moment, everything went dark. I felt myself being pulled, torn, but I clung to the one thing I had left, the hope that the others would escape, that they would survive. And then, nothing. The light dimmed. The figure's presence receded. I was alone. But in that moment of sacrifice, I had given them the chance. I had saved them. And that was enough. I opened my eyes to a silence so complete it was suffocating. At first, I couldn't tell where I was, disoriented. The ground beneath me felt unfamiliar, like the earth had somehow shifted in my absence. My body ached, every muscle strained as though I had been dragged across miles of rough terrain. I tried to sit up, but the dizziness was overwhelming, pulling me back to the ground. My breath came in ragged gasps as I blinked up at the sky, struggling to piece together what had just happened. The world around me was empty, the air still and cold, and all I could hear was the soft rustling of distant grass. When I finally managed to push myself upright, I noticed something strange. The field around me was vast, barren, nothing but dead grass and twisted earth. A few scattered wrecks of cars lay around, some overturned, some just abandoned, their windows shattered, their metal bodies rusting in the open air. But there was no sign of the light, no pulse of the figure looming in the distance. No survivors. I stood there, swaying, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The cars, they were the same ones I had seen before. The same as the ones abandoned along the road, the ones whose drivers had vanished without a trace. But now, there was no one left. No one to scream, no one to run with. Just me, standing in the middle of this desolate place, surrounded by broken machines, the remnants of lives that had been lost. I stumbled toward the nearest car, my legs unsteady beneath me. The door was slightly ajar, the interior untouched, the seats empty. I leaned in, half expecting to find someone inside, but there was nothing, no body, no sign of a struggle. Just the eerie emptiness that had settled over everything. Where had everyone gone? I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end as a deep, gnawing sense of dread crept in. The silence was too complete, too unnatural. I reached for the door of another car, my hands trembling, and swung it open. Inside, I found the same thing, empty. Nothing to explain what had happened, no clues to offer an answer. My mind raced as I looked around, but every direction I turned, it was the same. Abandoned cars. No sign of life. Just the feeling of being utterly alone. Had it been a dream? Was any of it real? I could still feel the presence, the weight of it, lingering somewhere deep inside me. The memories were too fresh, too vivid. The light. The whispers. The force that had pulled me, pulled us all, toward it. I could still hear it, faintly, in the back of my mind, a distant hum. But it was gone. The light was gone. The figure was gone. And I was still here, alone. I took a step back, my eyes scanning the horizon. There were no other people in sight. No movement. Nothing. Just the stillness of the field and the wreckage of the cars. But then, as I stood there, trying to gather my thoughts, I heard something. A sound, distant and faint. At first, I thought it was just the wind. But then it came again, closer this time. A low, almost imperceptible hum, like a machine still running in the distance. I turned my head sharply, searching for the source. It was faint, almost like a whisper carried on the breeze, but it was there. Something was out there. My heart raced as I felt a strange pull toward the sound. Without thinking, I began to walk, then run, toward it. The cars remained silent behind me, their broken forms just markers in the vast emptiness. Was it possible? Could it be another survivor? Or was it the light, returning to finish what it had started? I had no answers. I didn't know where I was or how I had ended up here. I didn't know if anyone else had made it out, or if I was the last one left. But I knew one thing for sure, I wasn't alone anymore. The hum was growing louder, closer, insistent. And whatever it was calling me. I had to find out what it was. I had to know what had happened to everyone, and to myself. But as I took another step forward, something deep inside me, a cold, quiet voice, whispered the truth. Maybe some questions are better left unanswered. Hope your dreams are filled with fear. Good night.